Hi guys. Tonight we are stepping through the looming wooden drawbridge of a medieval castle, with the last streaks of sunset glowing faintly behind you. The planks groan beneath your feet, and the air cools instantly as you cross from the open countryside into a world of stone walls, torchlight, and shadowy archways. You can almost feel the weight of history pressing down, as if the fortress itself has been waiting centuries for you to arrive. And, in truth, you probably wouldn't survive this long without some serious discomfort, but that's the fun of it, isn't it? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you'd like, post your location and the local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see who else is listening across the globe. Now, dim the lights, and let's begin. The drawbridge shudders as it settles back into place behind you, leaving the open world shut out. Beneath your boots, the grain of the wood is slick with damp, and beyond it lies the portcullis, a spiked iron gate suspended overhead. You glance upward, noticing the chains and pulley system that controls it. The knowledge that men with strong arms and steady hands could drop it in an instant sends a ripple of unease through you. Castles were built as fortresses first, homes second. Every creak, every chain clank, is designed to remind you of security or imprisonment, depending on your perspective. The air tastes different here. Outside, there was the earthy smell of fields and grass, perhaps even manure carried from nearby farms. Inside the castle, it is stone and smoke. The torch set in the wall just ahead spits sap and sends dribbles of wax down its iron sconce. The flames dance with a faint hiss, pulling your attention into the gloom ahead. You're stepping into another world, one without electricity, without gas lamps, without even the comfort of glass windows to shut out the night. Just fire, stone, and whatever warmth your cloak can hold. A mainstream historical fact is worth remembering. By the High Middle Ages, castles like this one were not just military strongholds but also centers of local government and aristocratic life. Nobles lived within these walls, but so too did their servants, guards, cooks, falconers, and sometimes entire families of retainers. It was less a home than a living, breathing ecosystem of people, animals, and machinery. The clang of blacksmiths echoed near the walls, and chickens scratched around the courtyards. Horses stabled below added their pungent smell to the mix. You can imagine the chorus of sound and scent waiting just past this first gateway. Yet there is also a quirky tidbit about medieval drawbridges. Not all castles actually had them. Many early stone castles relied simply on heavy wooden doors and moats. The romantic image of the creaking drawbridge, chains rattling as it rises or falls, is often more Hollywood than history. Still, by the late medieval period, the design became common, particularly in regions where watery defences were practical. You might smile at the thought that in some cases, the moat wasn't filled with water at all, it was simply a dry ditch, meant more to trip invaders than to drown them. Still effective, just not as cinematic. Historians still argue whether the experience of entering a castle was meant more to impress allies or intimidate enemies. Was the grandeur of high stone walls and echoing portcullises a symbol of hospitality or of warning? As you stand here in the dusk, waiting for your eyes to adjust, you might lean toward the latter. The whole space seems designed to swallow you, to remind you that you are small, vulnerable, and under someone else's authority. The drawbridge trembles one last time as you step fully onto the cobbles beyond it. Your feet strike uneven stones, worn down by generations of boots, hooves, and wagon wheels. Above, the battlements catch the last fading light of the evening, their jagged silhouettes stark against the reddening sky. For a moment, you hear the flutter of pigeons nesting in the cracks. You also catch the faint echo of men speaking a guard shift, perhaps, or just bored sentries trying to pass the long hours. There's something strangely comforting about that background noise. Without it, you'd hear only your own breath, amplified by the cold stone archway, as if the castle itself were breathing alongside you. You pause to notice the chill. It's sharper here, shaded by thick walls that hold onto damp air long after the sun sets. Your cloak clings to your shoulders, and you think about how little insulation these stones actually provide. Majestic they may be, but they were not built for comfort. It strikes you that people of the Middle Ages lived in this environment every day, without the option to flip a switch for light or warmth. Their evenings depended on the flutter of torches, the roar of a hearth fire, and the simple human company of voices to push back the night. You can almost hear a faint lute in the distance, plucking out a tune as if to remind you that not everything inside these walls is grim. But for now, the crossing is complete. You've stepped through the first threshold, from the outside world into the belly of the castle. You stand inside the gatehouse, where soldiers once kept watch, their spears ready, their eyes sharp for intruders. And now, your own journey begins, moving deeper into the labyrinth of stone and shadow. The night is only just starting. The first thing you notice as you leave the gatehouse behind is the air itself. It feels different, denser somehow, as though the walls hold not just the chill but also centuries of breath, sweat, and fire. The scent is unmistakable, a blend of damp stone, smoke from a dozen torches, and something earthy, almost metallic, rising from the ground beneath your boots. This is what people lived with every day inside a medieval castle. It is neither fresh nor clean, yet it is strangely grounding, like stepping into a place that belongs to time more than to you. Your footsteps echo faintly in the passage. The walls around you are thick, easily 10 feet deep in places, built not to please the eye but to withstand siege. The mortar is coarse, gritty to the touch, and streaked with centuries of soot. You run your fingers along one section and they come away dusty. Imagine what it would be like to sleep in a place like this, where the very walls seem alive with drafts. A modern house insulates, but here, the cold has a habit of slipping in, no matter how many fires you light. A mainstream historical fact puts this into perspective. Castle walls were usually built from local stone, chosen for availability and durability rather than comfort. In Northern Europe, granite or sandstone was common, while in other places, limestone or even rubble mixed with mortar formed the core of the fortress. The sheer thickness of the masonry meant heat was almost impossible to hold. During winter, those who lived inside sometimes complained that the rooms were colder than the fields outside, the stones leaching warmth as though they were hungry. You can see why tapestries weren't just decorative, they were insulation, blankets hung on walls. As you stand there, breathing in the scent of this stony air, you recall a quirky tidbit. Some chroniclers claimed that castles sweated in the evenings. The damp would condense on the walls, trickling down in beads like perspiration. Of course, this was just moisture gathering when the inside air met the cold of the stone, but the image of a castle sweating like a tired old giant is difficult to shake. You picture yourself leaning against one wall and feeling that clammy wetness seep into your sleeve. Cozy? Not really. Memorable? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether life in castles was more comfortable than life in the average peasant's hut. The instinct is to say yes, after all. Castles had walls, towers, security, and servants. Yet when it comes to everyday experience, the draughty chambers and smoky great halls may have made the noble's lifestyle less cushy than we imagine. A peasant huddled by his thatched hearth might have had a steadier warmth than a baron in his lofty chamber with windows open to the wind. It depends on perspective and on what you value, security from invaders or comfort from the cold. The flicker of a torch ahead draws your eyes to the uneven ceiling. Soot marks streak across the stone ribs, reminders of years of open flames burning here. You hear a faint, dripping sound, the steady plink of water collecting somewhere unseen. It's not a dramatic sound, but in the silence of the corridor, it feels amplified. You imagine trying to sleep with that sound echoing nearby, a constant reminder that the castle is porous, always letting in little fragments of the outside world. The floor beneath you is uneven cobble, worn smooth in the middle where countless feet have passed, jagged at the edges where no one treads. Every step reminds you that medieval people had sturdier ankles than we do. You think about how dangerous it would be to stumble carrying a candle here, the flame sputtering out, plunging you into blackness. Without electricity, darkness is absolute. No glow from street lamps, no faint hum of appliances, just ink. Imagine the panic if you dropped your torch. And then there's the smell again. It clings to you now, a cocktail of wax smoke, damp stone, and the faint but undeniable presence of animals. Horses are stabled in the lower ward, pigs snuffling somewhere near the kitchens. Even here, the smell rises and lingers. It's not foul, exactly, but it's ever present, a reminder that castles were not sterile monuments but bustling, earthy communities. The walls themselves seem to exhale it. You step further inside, and the air grows cooler. There is a weight to it, a heaviness that makes your breath fog in front of you. You wrap your cloak tighter, realizing that warmth in this world comes not from the environment, but from layers of fabric, from huddling together, from proximity to fire. A single misplaced draught could undo the effort of an entire hearth. It strikes you that medieval life was one long battle against cold and damp. A rat scurries across the passage ahead, its claws clicking against stone. You startle, though of course, such creatures were part of the landscape here. Castles were full of them: rats, mice, sometimes even martens or weasels sneaking in for food scraps. Cats prowled the halls, tolerated for their usefulness rather than cherished as pets. You picture the candlelight catching the glint of a rat's eye in the shadows, and you wonder how many were watching you even now. Somewhere above, a faint shout echoes guards on the battlements, calling to each other as night settles. Their words blur into indistinct syllables, but the tone carries. Vigilance, routine, boredom. They are the ones who make sure the portcullis stays closed, the walls stay secure. They are the human element of the stone air you now breathe. A reminder that these walls were not just passive defenses but living systems, dependent on men who were often underpaid, underfed, and yet expected to remain alert. You pass under another archway and pause. The air shifts here. It feels even more enclosed, as though the castle has drawn you deeper into its lungs. You think of the hundreds of people who must have breathed this same damp, smoky air. Lords in fine cloaks, servants scurrying with platters, children chasing each other, guards sweating in their mail. You inhale again, and in that moment you are one of them, sharing their world in the most intimate way possible through breath. The notion might make you shiver. And yet, it is this same air, heavy and imperfect, that sustained entire communities. People laughed here, argued, plotted, and prayed, all while breathing this mix of damp and smoke. It was part of life, accepted and expected. You realize now that the discomfort of the stone air was not a flaw but simply the texture of existence. To them it was normal. To you, it feels alien, pressing in from every side. And so, as you stand in this passage, the realization dawns. You are not just walking through a building. You are walking inside a memory of how people lived, what they tolerated, and how they defined survival. The air carries it all: smoke, sweat, damp, and history itself. You're not alone in this castle, and you know it the moment you step out from the stone passageway into a broader space where shadows dart and flicker. The light here comes from torches set unevenly along the walls, their flames bending with each small gust. Against the golden shimmer, you catch glimpses of movement: figures bent low, shoulders hunched, voices whispering. Servants, always servants, slipping about like threads in a great loom that keeps the entire castle alive. Your lungs fill again, and you push forward, deeper into the castle's embrace. The air here is not silent, nor is it steady. You hear a shuffle of feet brushing against the floor, the slap of leather sandals, and the occasional clatter of something dropped, perhaps a wooden cup or an iron ladle. Somewhere deeper, a pair of boys haul a heavy jug, straining under its weight. Their breath comes ragged, a reminder that even children were part of this machine. You realize that, In this world, childhood was short, responsibility beginning almost as soon as hands were strong enough to carry, scrub, or polish. A mainstream historical fact underscores the reality. In great castles of the Middle Ages, the staff might number in the dozens or even hundreds, depending on the size of the household. Cooks, bakers, stable hands, laundresses, grooms, falconers, clerks all had their place. The lord himself may have been the master, but the heartbeat of the castle was in these tireless workers who carried out every detail of life. You can almost imagine their daily routine up before dawn, asleep long after the last candle burned low. That silence you thought medieval knights possessed? Not here. Historians still debate whether these servants were treated as family members or as disposable labour. Some records suggest lords rewarded their loyalty generously, granting land or coin to long-serving retainers. Others tell of harsh discipline, punishments for lateness or mistakes, and a hierarchy so rigid that stepping out of line could mean dismissal or worse. As you watch one maid hurry by, her arms full of rough linen sheets, you can't help but wonder, did she feel pride at being part of a noble household, or did she only feel the weight of exhaustion? Your eyes adjust to the rhythm of the space. A woman crouches by a torch, trimming the wick to keep it from smoking too heavily. Another pushes a broom across the flagstones, stirring up dust that glimmers briefly in the firelight before sinking back down. The smell is sharper here, sweat mingling with candle wax, and underneath it all, the faint tang of wet rushes scattered on the floor. These rushes, replaced periodically, were meant to soak up dirt, spills, and the casual droppings of everyday life. To us, they smell like hay left too long in the rain, but to them, it was simply the scent of a lived-in space. You stop for a moment and lean against the cool wall, watching the swirl of activity. There is no pause for these people, no sense of leisure. A boy rushes past, balancing a tray with wooden cups. He stumbles, rights himself, then disappears into the shadows, his bare feet slapping softly against stone. Somewhere farther along, you hear a door creak open, a gruff voice muttering orders, and a cluster of servants scattering like startled birds. It strikes you that this invisible workforce carried not just platters and linens, but the very rhythm of life in the castle. When the lord demanded heat, they built the fire. When he demanded a feast, they roasted the meat. When he demanded silence, they lowered their heads and vanished. Their presence was constant, yet their recognition was fleeting. And yet, as you move deeper into this servant-filled corridor, you sense something else too: camaraderie. A girl whispers something to her friend, and both stifle a laugh. A boy pauses to sneak a bite of bread before tucking the rest under his arm for later. These small human gestures remind you that even in the endless grind, life had its sparks of warmth. Imagine being one of them, finding joy in whispers and stolen moments, even while burdened with ceaseless labor. The torches sputter as a draft snakes through the corridor, sending smoke spiraling toward the vaulted ceiling. Your eyes water slightly, and you cough, realizing that the servants must have endured this daily. Medieval castles had little in the way of ventilation. Smoke gathered in rafters, clung to clothes, and lodged in lungs. The smell of a servant in this world was not perfume or soap, but smoke, sweat, and wool. You follow the sound of scurrying feet until you emerge into a broader space. Here, the activity intensifies. Two men roll a barrel across the floor, the wood thumping with each turn. A group of girls kneel near a basin, scrubbing fabric in cold water, their knuckles red and raw. A dog trots through, tail wagging, then pauses to lick up something spilled before disappearing again. The castle is alive in every corner. You pause to wonder, where did they sleep? Most servants didn't have chambers of their own. They curled up on pallets in corners, near the warmth of a kitchen, or in shared quarters so cramped that the air must have felt suffocating. Privacy was a rare luxury, and comfort rarer still. You imagine them now, their day not even half over, yet their bodies already aching with the knowledge that rest would come only briefly, and never fully. And still, Their presence made everything else possible. The castle lord might command armies, but without these scurrying figures, his hall would be cold, his table bare, his chamber unmade. They were the invisible scaffolding holding up the grandeur. You think back to the footsteps you heard in the gatehouse, the echo of soldiers above, the shuffle of servants below. Together, they created the texture of the castle. Vigilance and labor, strength and exhaustion, woven into a single night. You take another breath, the smoky, sweaty air filling your lungs, and you realize how deeply these people's lives shaped the atmosphere you now move through. The torches flare again as more servants pass by, their faces half hidden, their hands full, and so you keep walking, deeper into the heart of the castle, carried along by the tide of their restless, endless work. The soundscape changes as soon as you step into the open courtyard. The air, once dense with smoke and damp stone, loosens into something sharper, fresher, and more chaotic all at once. The courtyard is alive, even at dusk. The cobbles beneath your boots are slick with a day's worth of mud tracked in by horses and boots, and in the half-light, the uneven stones glisten with faint puddles. The space feels enormous after the narrow corridors, yet the walls that surround it rise so high they swallow the last scraps of sky. Everywhere you look, movement. A groom leads a snorting horse across the yard, the animal's hooves clanging on the cobbles. A pair of chickens flap and scatter as a servant girl chases them toward a coop tucked against one wall. From an upper window, a burst of laughter spills down, quickly muffled, as if someone was caught speaking out of turn. The air is filled with smells so strong and varied they nearly overwhelm you. Hay and manure, iron freshly hammered, smoke drifting from a kitchen fire, and somewhere, the sweet note of roasted onions. Medieval documents make it plain that courtyards like this were the heart of castle life. Far from being serene stone squares, they pulsed with noise and labor. This was where carts rolled in, where goods were unloaded, where blacksmiths kept their forges glowing, and dogs skulked for scraps. To imagine a castle without this chaos is to imagine an empty shell. You can practically feel the vibrations of activity beneath your feet as you stand here, a newcomer intruding on their well-worn routines. One curious observation passed down from travelers is how sound seemed to cling in these spaces. Shouts bounced off the high walls, echoes overlapping until even the simplest message was blurred. A single command might sound like 10 voices calling at once. Picture trying to sleep while the clatter of hooves and iron echoed long into the night, ricocheting from stone to stone. Silence was rare. In a fortress, noise was the constant companion of safety. Experts remain divided on whether castle courtyards were primarily places of business or also of leisure. Certainly, practical work dominated. Smithing, stabling, hauling, feeding. But records also suggest tournaments, dances, even games were occasionally staged here, transforming the workyard into a stage for spectacle. Was the clanging forge simply background noise for laughter and song? Or did the grime of daily labor drown out any attempt at leisure? Tonight, you feel only the restless energy of work, the hum of many hands, doing their part to keep the Lord's household alive. Your eyes drift to the forge near the far wall. The glow of the fire licks out into the courtyard, sparks floating upward like tiny stars. A blacksmith hammers steadily, each strike ringing out so sharp and steady, you almost feel it in your chest. The smell of hot iron is unmistakable metallic, biting, carried on the evening wind. You picture the smith's sweat dripping into the fire as he works, sparks catching on his tunic. His arms swing with rhythm, his body a machine as vital as any gear or pulley. Nearby, a pair of boys chase after one another, wooden swords clacking as they spar. Their laughter cuts through the heavier sounds for a moment, reminding you that not everything here is toil. Childhood, even in its shortened medieval form, left room for play. The boys duck behind a cart, then dash out again, scattering a group of hens. The shriek of a startled bird rings out, and for a moment, Everyone nearby glances up before returning to their work. At one side of the yard, a cart creaks as it's unloaded. Barrels thud onto the stones, and a man pries open the lid of one with a knife. The sharp, briny scent of salted fish bursts into the air. You wrinkle your nose, it's pungent, salty, almost eye-watering. But to the castle's inhabitants, it's a lifeline. Fresh food is scarce in winter. Preserved fish, salted meat, and dried beans are survival. The courtyard is their pantry, warehouse, and delivery station all at once. You pause near the well, a deep stone cylinder at the center of the yard. A servant lowers a bucket, the rope groaning as it unwinds. A splash echoes faintly, followed by the creak of wood as she hauls it back up. The water sloshes over the rim, darkening the cobbles. You dip your fingers in, it's icy, startlingly cold, and so clean compared to the smoky taste of air inside the corridors. Wells like this were lifelines too, but they were also vulnerabilities. During sieges, enemies often targeted them, and there are accounts of wells poisoned or blocked. A chilling thought as you let the droplets run down your wrist. Above, from the battlements, you hear the crunch of boots. Guards pace steadily, their silhouettes framed by the reddening sky. Their armor creaks faintly as they shift their weight, halberds glinting as they pass the torches set along the wallwalk. You realize that while the courtyard bustles with servants and laborers, it is also always under watch. The gaze of authority presses down even here. The smells swirl thicker as the wind shifts. You catch the heavy, wet scent of dung from the stables. A horse whinnies and stamps its hoof impatiently, the sound echoing off the walls. Stable boys shout to one another, dragging hay bales across the ground. The scrape of wood, the thump of straw, the grunt of effort, each sound builds the atmosphere, until you can almost feel your ears ringing with it. One odd little truth. Many castles kept not only horses and poultry, but sometimes entire herds of sheep or goats inside the walls during troubled times. The animals were noisy, smelly, and unruly, but they represented survival. Imagine this courtyard filled not just with clanging iron and rushing servants, but the bleats, brays, and lowing of penned livestock. Sleep would have been nearly impossible without learning to tune it all out. As you stand there, watching the mix of animals, people, and tools, it occurs to you how much the courtyard was like a living stage. Every role was being played at once, servants darting like dancers, animals adding their voices, blacksmiths pounding percussion into the air. The castle may have belonged to the Lord, but its heart beat right here, in the clamour of this space. The light fades quickly now. Torches sputter, and the forge glows brighter against the dimming sky. The laughter from the boys fades as their mother calls them in, her voice sharp and hurried. A dog barks at nothing in particular, the sound bouncing off the walls before blending into the general hum. Slowly, the courtyard begins to shift, the energy tilting toward the coming night. Work slows. Servants scurry off to prepare the hall. Horses stamp in their stalls, restless but quieter. The blacksmith gives his anvil one last ringing strike before letting the fire rest. You take one more look around. The courtyard is both ordinary and extraordinary, muddy cobbles, smoke, noise, smells that cling to your cloak. Yet in its chaos lies the truth of castle life. Not glamorous, not silent, but a constant negotiation between survival and ceremony. This was where you felt the pulse of the place most strongly. And with that pulse still in your ears, you move toward the stairway that winds upward, leaving the courtyard's cacophony behind as you ascend toward the higher chambers. The stairwell pulls you upward, one slow step at a time, and with every twist you feel the walls pressing tighter around you. This isn't a grand, sweeping staircase made to impress, it's a defensive coil, narrow and steep, forcing your body into awkward angles. Your hand glides along the central pillar, its stone polished, smooth by centuries of fingers clutching in the dark. The air grows heavier the higher you climb, as though the stone itself squeezes out every trace of warmth. Each step is uneven, chipped, some sloping forward as though eager to send you tumbling. The spiral winds clockwise, and you realize why. Defenders at the top, swords in their right hands, had more room to swing downward, while attackers below would be cramped, their blades smacking stone before finding flesh. The stairway itself is a weapon, one that doesn't rest even when the castle does. Documents from the period make it clear that these stairs were deliberately designed for more than function. Their narrowness forced enemies into single file, their height slowed progress, and the tiny arrow slits carved into the walls allowed defenders to stab or shoot from above. It was architecture with strategy built into its bones. As you drag your feet upward, you can't help but marvel at the cunning hidden in every stone. And yet, one odd little detail makes you pause. In some castles, the spiral actually ran the opposite direction. Why? Historians speculate that it had to do with left-handed lords who wanted the advantage for themselves, or with builders simply following local traditions. You can picture the arguments. Should the steps spiral this way or that? While masons laid each stone without realizing their decision would one day baffle scholars. A castle wasn't a uniform machine. It was a reflection of its builder's quirks. Scholars remain divided on whether climbing these stairs by torchlight would have been common for most inhabitants. Some suggest servants avoided them after dusk, sticking instead to lower corridors where candlelight was plentiful. Others argue that night brought no relief from errands, lords summoned attendants at all hours, and so servants tramped up and down, their shadows stretching grotesquely along the walls. Tonight, as you climb, your torch sputters, its smoke curling back down toward you, and you feel the truth of both possibilities. A climb here at night was both dangerous and necessary. The sound is what stays with you. Your boots strike hollow against the stone, each step echoing upward in a rhythm that feels endless. Behind you, the sound rebounds, as though someone else is climbing too, just a pace or two below. You pause, glance back, but of course there's nothing, only the flicker of shadows, the dizzying twist of the staircase coiling downward. It's enough to make you wonder how many feet have trodden this same path, how many echoes linger, carrying voices from long ago. You grip the wall as the stair narrows still further. Your shoulders brush against the damp surface, and you feel grit flake off under your touch. The smell here is sharp, wet lime, dust, the acrid tang of smoke trapped in the stones. You cough once, the sound bouncing up and down like a bird trapped in a well. It's easy to see why people might have feared these stairs at night. One slip, one stumble, and you'd crash against the hard edges, your torch extinguished, your body crumpled in darkness. Still, there is a kind of strange beauty to it. The flame in your hand sends shifting shadows along the inner column, the lines spiraling upward like a giant seashell carved in stone. You tilt your head back, and for a moment the staircase feels endless, a coil leading not to a chamber but to the heavens themselves. It's mesmerizing, hypnotic even, until the weight of the climb pulls you back down to earth. Halfway up, you pause at a slit window, narrow as the width of your palm. Cold air rushes in, brushing against your cheek. You lean close, peering out. Below lies the courtyard you just left, its torches glowing like scattered stars on the cobbles. The clang of the blacksmith has stopped, replaced by the softer sounds of horses snorting in the stables and servants hurrying into the hall. Above, the sky has deepened into indigo, one or two early stars peeking through. The slit is too narrow for comfort, but it is enough to remind you of the world beyond these walls, a world of open air and freedom. And then you continue climbing. Step after step, your thighs burning, your breath growing shallow. You think about the people who carried trays of food, bundles of wood, even weapons up and down these very steps. Servants lugging chamber pots, guards hauling barrels of arrows, each stair was a burden, each turn another challenge. It wasn't just stone, it was labor carved into every angle. The silence grows heavier the higher you climb. The echoes fade, replaced by a kind of humming emptiness, the sort that presses into your ears and makes you aware of your own heartbeat. You catch yourself wondering, what if the torch died here? What if you stood in this narrow coil with no light at all? The thought is claustrophobic, suffocating. You imagine the stair swallowing you whole, and suddenly the flicker of flame feels like the most precious thing in the world. You reach another landing, where the stairs briefly widen. A worn wooden door hangs slightly ajar, its iron hinges squealing when you nudge it. Inside is a small alcove, probably once a guard station or resting spot. A broken stool leans against the wall, and in the corner lies a pile of straw that once served as bedding. You picture a guard sitting here through the night, cloak wrapped tight, ears straining for any sound from below. The monotony must have been unbearable, the cold bone deep, the stairwell echoing with nothing but his own breath. Stepping back into the spiral, you feel the press of history more acutely than ever. These stairs weren't just stones stacked in a coil. They were arteries of the castle, carrying people, goods, fears, and hopes. They connected the noisy courtyard below with the lofty chambers above, binding the world of labor with the world of privilege. Each turn was a reminder of the separation between those who served and those who ruled. At last, the stairs bend one final time, and you see the faint glow of firelight ahead. Relief washes through you. You step onto a wider landing, your muscles trembling, your cloak damp with sweat despite the chill. You glance back once more at the staircase, its spiral vanishing into darkness, and feel a shiver that isn't just from the cold. The climb is over for now. Ahead lies the promise of warmth, of company, of the great hall where the castle's heart beats strongest. You steady your breath, shift the torch in your hand, and step forward into the glow. The stairwell breath leaves your chest as you emerge into a cavernous space, the kind of chamber that makes you pause simply to take it in. The great hall stretches out before you, vast and echoing, its walls soaring high into a timbered roof that disappears into shadow. You expected stone to feel cold and lifeless, but here the sheer scale transforms it. Flickering firelight rolls across carved beams, long tapestries, and the faces of dozens of people already gathered. This is not just a room, it is the beating heart of the castle. The first thing you notice is the fire. A great hearth blazes at one end of the hall, its flames snapping and leaping as logs collapse into glowing embers. The heat pours outward, though it doesn't fill the space evenly. Near the fire, cheeks flush and hands are warm. Farther away, the air is cool, and drafts sneak under the edges of doors, making cloaks a necessity even indoors. You pull yours tighter, realizing comfort in this hall depends not just on privilege but on proximity. Contemporary accounts remind us that the Great Hall was more than dining space. It was the symbol of lordly power, the stage where authority was performed as much as meals were eaten. Here justice might be dispensed, visitors received, and feasts displayed with theatrical grandeur. The Lord's seat, often raised upon a dais at the far end, served as a constant reminder of hierarchy. As your eyes adjust, you spot the high-backed chair, its silhouette dominating the firelight, every detail meant to broadcast power. Strangely enough, some descriptions of medieval feasts mention that the hall was not always as clean or dignified as we might imagine. Dogs roamed freely, snapping at scraps. Bones were tossed casually onto the rushes that covered the floor. Even during solemn banquets, the smell of sweat, smoke, and animal grease hung thick in the air. The grandeur of ceremony coexisted with a grittiness that modern visitors would find shockingly ordinary. You imagine a servant stooping quickly to collect the choicest leftovers before the hounds could reach them, a quiet economy within the Lord's display of wealth. Researchers continue to question how democratic the Great Hall really was. Was it a place where the community came together, or was it a theatre of exclusion, reminding everyone of their place? The seating arrangements alone speak volumes. The Lord and his family near the fire, honoured guests along the central table, retainers and servants further down, often near the draughty doorways. It's difficult not to notice how the architecture itself reinforced the social ladder. Tonight, you hover near the edges, both guest and outsider, watching the arrangement unfold. The sensory detail overwhelms you. Smoke curls upward, catching in your throat. The crackle of fire mingles with the scrape of benches and the thump of mugs against wood. Somewhere in the corner, a lute plucks a tentative tune, its notes thin against the din. You catch the sour tang of ale being poured, the savoury aroma of roasted meat carried on wooden platters, and the sharp sweetness of apples baked in pastry. It is a mixture both appetizing and faintly acrid, a feast for senses already tired from the cold stare. You glance upward at the tapestries that line the walls. Their colours, though faded, still glow in the firelight scenes of hunting, battles, and heraldry stitched in wool and silk. They are not just decoration, they are insulation, muffling echoes and trapping what little heat the fire provides. To modern eyes they seem beautiful, almost museum-worthy, but here they are functional, part of survival as much as display. You trace the outline of a stag stitched in gold thread and wonder how many winters it has endured, its fabric absorbing centuries of smoke. Beneath your boots, the floor crunches softly. The rushes scattered across it are fresh, mixed with herbs like lavender and mint to mask less pleasant odors. But freshness is relative. Mixed among the herbs are bones, grease stains, and crumbs from previous meals, pressed flat by countless feet. It's easy to imagine rats slipping through in the night, sniffing eagerly, their presence tolerated as part of the backdrop. To live in a medieval great hall was to live with constant company, both human and otherwise. At the center of it all is sound. Laughter bursts from one table, a loud guffaw followed by a playful shove. Nearby, a woman hushes a child, who nevertheless squeals as he chases a dog under the benches. Servants weave between them all, balancing trays heavy with trenchers of bread and platters of meat. The rhythm of the hall is not orderly, it is messy, human, and alive. You can almost feel your pulse quicken, caught up in the hum of it. And then you spot the Lord himself. Seated at the high table, his figure rises above the room like the final note in a chord. His clothing gleams with embroidered detail, and a chain of metal hangs heavy across his chest. His voice carries clearly, measured, and commanding, and others lean in to catch his words. Here, authority is not shouted. It is woven into posture, tone, and placement. You feel the subtle shift of the room whenever his hand lifts or his gaze drifts. The glow of the hearth catches on the silver goblet he holds. He raises it slightly, and conversation ebbs just enough for you to hear the toast, a simple welcome perhaps, or a call for loyalty. The words matter less than the act itself, for it binds the gathering together under his authority. You realize that the Great Hall is as much about ritual as about sustenance. To eat here is to participate in a performance of hierarchy. And yet, for all its grandeur, the hall is not immune to small disruptions. A platter slips from a servant's hand, clattering loudly and sending bones skittering across the rushes. A dog pounces, a child laughs, and for a moment the room erupts in a ripple of chaos. You catch the brief flicker of irritation across the Lord's face, then it is gone, smoothed into practiced composure. Power requires constant maintenance, and even a clattering platter becomes part of the balancing act. The heat near the fire lures you forward. As you step closer, the air grows warmer, your cheeks tingling from the sudden shift. A group of men sit nearby, their armor half removed, boots steaming faintly as the warmth dries the damp leather. They laugh easily, mugs clinking together, their voices rising with drink. Their camaraderie is loud, almost contagious, though you sense it masks exhaustion, the weariness of men whose nights are often spent on cold walls rather than beside roaring flames. You drift past, toward the benches where servants sit lower down. Their fare is simpler pottage in wooden bowls, coarse bread dipped into broth. Yet there is a kind of ease here, a chatter free of ceremony. They lean close, sharing jokes, their laughter softer but warmer than the booming voices of the lords. It strikes you that joy exists at every level of the hall, though it takes different shapes. Somewhere overhead, a draught whistles through a narrow window, stirring the flames and making the shadows dance across the beams. You tilt your head back and imagine the rafters alive with smoke and bats, their tiny wings flickering in the gloom. The hall may be a place of grandeur, but it is never fully separated from nature. The night presses in through every crack. As you settle onto a bench, you take in the full sweep of the space again. The fire blazing, the Lord presiding, the servants bustling, the laughter spilling into corners. It is magnificent and messy, warm and cold, elevated and earthy. To spend a night in this hall is to witness the contradictions of medieval life order and chaos, power and vulnerability, comfort and discomfort woven together under one roof. The torches flare brighter for a moment as more wood is thrown on the fire. The music in the corner gains confidence, the lute joined by a voice humming a tune that sways above the din. The hall grows louder, merrier, as though determined to push back the darkness outside. And so you remain, drawn into the great hall's embrace, your senses saturated with its sights, sounds, and scents. It is not the silence of a fortress you found, but the vibrant hum of a world determined to keep the night at bay. The warmth of the hall draws you closer to the fire, but before you can sink too far into its glow, the commotion of supper begins. Servants appear in pairs, each balancing heavy wooden platters, their arms straining under the weight. A hush does not fall over the crowd, the opposite occurs. Voices rise, laughter grows, benches scrape as men shift, and the smell of roasted meat surges into the air like a tide. The first platters carry roasted fowl geese and capons, their golden skins glistening with fat that drips and sizzles as it meets the cooler air. The aroma is intoxicating, rich and heavy, carrying hints of sage, garlic, and smoke. You can almost taste the crackle of the skin between your teeth, though you know most diners will dig in with their fingers, tearing meat apart and wiping their hands on the rushes beneath them. A few trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread used as plates are passed down the tables. Soon they will be soaked with grease and sauce, destined either for the poor waiting outside the gates or for the dogs that roam freely underfoot. Medieval chronicles make it clear that feasts were not nightly affairs of such scale, but when they occurred, they were designed to impress. To see such abundance, birds, pigs, bread, fish, ale, was to see the Lord's power and generosity displayed in tangible form. It wasn't just nourishment, it was politics on a plate. A guest leaving hungry would remember the insult, and a servant caught sneaking too much would feel the sting of punishment. Every bite carried weight beyond its flavor. One curious description from a 14th century feast notes that entire peacocks were sometimes served with their feathers reattached after roasting, the birds appearing in shimmering glory as though alive again. Imagine the spectacle: a servant bearing a platter with a magnificent bird, its tail feathers fanned in impossible splendor, only to be carved moments later. It was theater, pure and dazzling, designed to dazzle guests and assert dominance through spectacle. Tonight, no peacocks strut across the tables you see, but the same intention lingers in every lavish dish. Experts continue to puzzle over how much of this extravagance was shared with the lower tiers of diners. Did the servants at the far benches taste the roasted fowl, or were they limited to the broth and bread? Some argue that generosity was real, that all present partook of the feast, while others note that records suggest strict divisions, with the choicest cuts reserved for those closest to the dais. Looking at the Lord's table now, heaped with gleaming platters, and comparing it to the simpler bowls passed down to the servants, you sense both answers are true. Generosity and exclusion coexisted, depending on one's seat. The noise builds as the feast progresses. Cups clink, laughter bursts. A dog growls low as it wrestles a bone from a boy's hand. The heat from the hearth competes with the body heat of dozens of diners, and the air grows thick, smoky, almost stifling. You wipe your brow, realizing that medieval comfort was never about balance. It swung from cold draughts in the corners to sweltering heat near the fire, from hunger in the lean months to gluttony at the Lord's command. Your senses pull in every detail. The tang of ale foams in wooden mugs, leaving rings on the table. The sharp sweetness of baked apples cuts through the meat's heaviness. A server carrying a pot of pottage strips, and hot liquid splashes across the rushes. releasing a steamy scent of peas and onions. Laughter follows her stumble, but she bows her head and hurries back, no one offering a hand. The rhythm of service must not falter, even for embarrassment. You notice, too, the tools of eating. Knives flash here and there, personal belongings rather than provided utensils. Forks, that modern necessity, are almost absent rare curiosities in most of Europe at this time. Instead, fingers do the work, tearing, dipping, scooping. Grease slicks hands and beards alike, and the rushes absorb what the trenchers cannot. The image might feel crude to modern eyes, but here it is simply the natural way, as ordinary as reaching for a spoon in your own kitchen. Above the din, a minstrel's song swells, tentative at first, then stronger as the diners cheer. The lute strings hum, and a clear voice carries a ballad of hunting and victory. The melody curls through the smoky air, weaving itself into the tapestry of smells and sounds. For a moment, even the loudest voices soften, drawn into the rhythm of story. Music was the thread that tied such meals together, a reminder that feasting was not only about eating but about belonging to a shared tale. You shift your gaze toward the servants once more. Their corner is quieter, though not silent. They eat with speed, knowing their work is not done. Their laughter is brief, their bites large, and their eyes always darting toward the tables they serve. You realize their feast is not relaxation but refueling, their joy tempered by constant vigilance. And yet, there is something undeniably warm about their camaraderie. They nudge each other, whisper jokes, share a crust of bread when one's portion runs thin. Survival, yes, but also community. One rare and almost humorous fact lingers in your mind. Accounts describe how some nobles employed food tasters to guard against poisoning men or women who sampled each dish before it touched the Lord's lips. Imagine the tension of that role, taking the first bite not for pleasure, but as a test of loyalty and risk. Perhaps someone in the hall tonight has already done so, their face carefully unreadable as they watch the Lord raise his cup. The feast stretches on, time blurring as platters are replaced and mugs refilled. The atmosphere grows rowdier, the laughter sharper, and the lines between formality and chaos thinner. You can feel the energy of the hall shift, a tide rising not just with food but with the intoxication of company, drink, and warmth. Yet beneath it all remains the constant reminder of hierarchy, the dais elevated, the servants hovering, the Lord presiding. You lean back for a moment, closing your eyes. The din becomes a blanket of sound, the smells a haze, the warmth both comforting and oppressive. This is not a meal in the modern sense, it is an event, a statement, a performance. To spend a night in a castle without gas or electricity is to experience a feast as both sustenance and symbol. And as you open your eyes again, watching another platter carried forward, you realize the meal is only one part of the evening's ritual. Entertainment, politics, and unspoken rules still wait to play out in the flicker of the firelight. The food lingers on your tongue, rich and heavy, but before you can drift into satisfaction, the rhythm of the evening shifts. The servants clear away the emptiest platters, dogs gnaw bones in corners, and the musicians begin to change their tune. The hall is settling into its second act, not eating, but displaying. Your eyes are drawn immediately to the dais where the Lord presides. His chair, carved high and heavy, is more than furniture, it is stagecraft. You notice how even the placement of torches ensures his features are visible, glowing with authority while shadows swallow the faces farther down the benches. Every movement he makes carries weight. A raised hand silences a quarrel. A nod sends servants scurrying. A laugh ripples outward like a command disguised as cheer. Contemporary chronicles remind us that the Lord's table was as much about diplomacy as about dinner. Here, alliances were cemented, grievances aired, favors requested. To sit close to him was not just privilege but influence, each seat carefully chosen to signal standing. A guest exiled to the far end might as well have been issued a warning. Placement was power. One eccentric custom mentioned in court records describes how nobles sometimes staged subtle contests during meals. Who could carve a roast most elegantly? Who could balance courtesy with appetite? A clumsy slice or a greedy mouthful might earn a smirk, a whisper, or worse, a lasting stain on one's reputation. It seems laughable, but reputations lived and died in gestures as small as how one tore bread. You can almost feel the tension, invisible yet sharp, as you watch guests measuring themselves not only against the food but against each other. Experts disagree on how openly hostile these feasts could become. Some argue they were showcases of harmony, ritual meant to smooth disputes. Others point to records of brawls, duels sparked after too much ale, even daggers drawn when tempers boiled over. Looking around the tables tonight, with voices rising and mugs slamming harder on wood, you can imagine both. One moment of laughter might cover old wounds, another might rip them wide open. You study the faces near the Lord. To his right, a visiting knight, his chainmail polished until it glimmers, leans forward eagerly with each word. To his left, a cleric in robes, fingers fiddling with a rosary, murmurs something that makes the Lord chuckle. The two could not be more different. One built for battle, one for prayer, yet both seek the same thing: proximity to power. Their conversation is not idle chatter but a dance, every word measured, every nod calculated. Farther down the hall the scene shifts. Guests slouch, laughter grows bawdier, and crumbs scatter across the rushes. A man sways as he lifts his cup too high, spilling ale down his tunic, while his companions roar. The gulf between dais and bench is more than distance, it is a difference of worlds. The upper end plays at politics, the lower end drowns in noise. You find your eyes darting between them, two halves of the same hall, bound together yet worlds apart. The musicians shift again, strings plucking faster, a drum beat echoing like footsteps in the dark. A jester leaps forward, bells on his cap jingling, his grin wide enough to rival the torch flames. He capers, tumbles, and snaps out jokes, some sly, some crude. The crowd roars with laughter, though you notice how carefully he glances toward the dais before each punchline. The line between entertainment and offense is thin, and he walks it with acrobat's precision. The smells shift too. The strongest food aromas fade, replaced by smoke, sweat, and the sour tang of spilled drink. A draught carries in the faint scent of wet hay from the stables below, a reminder that the castle is never fully sealed from the outside world. You realize how layered the sensory world here is: never one clean smell, never one pure sound, but a chorus, always mingled. Your gaze drifts again to the Lord. He raises his goblet, and conversation hushes almost instinctively. His words are brief, a toast, a blessing, perhaps a warning, but every eye in the room follows his lips. The power of performance lies not in length but in timing, and he knows this well. A servant refills his cup before it empties. His chain glints once more, and the hall resumes its rhythm, reminded of the gravity that anchors it. Somewhere behind you a child cries, tugging at his mother's sleeve. She hushes him quickly, casting nervous glances, as though sound itself could bring punishment. The boy quiets, but his small whimper lingers, reminding you that not everyone here is a guest. Many are simply swept along in the tide of hierarchy, present because they must be, not because they are wanted. One peculiar note comes to mind. Some accounts describe lords who dined behind curtains, hidden from view, speaking to guests only through intermediaries. It sounds absurd, but to them, distance equaled majesty. Tonight your lord does not hide, but the dais itself functions as a veil, raising him above while you remain below. The message is the same. You may look, you may listen, but you may not be equal. The hall grows hotter as logs are thrown on the hearth. Shadows lengthen, stretching across the tables like fingers. The musicians swell louder, and for a moment the jester cartwheels across the rushes, bells jingling madly. A mug crashes to the floor, dogs leap after the spill, and voices rise in wild approval. The great hall has shifted from order into revelry, from ceremony into chaos. And yet, even in the madness, the dais remains still, controlled, watchful. You lean back on the bench, letting the sounds wash over you. The clang of mugs, the beat of the drum, the rasp of laughter. It is overwhelming, almost hypnotic. And yet, behind it all, you hear the steady crackle of the fire, grounding the hall in its ancient rhythm. Fire, food, voices, authority, four notes in a chord that has played for centuries. The night deepens, the torches burn lower, their smoke curling heavier. The feast is not over, but its peak has passed. You can feel the hall sag slightly, like a tide pulling back, leaving only echoes of its roar. Servants begin to collect scraps, musicians slow their pace, and the jester bows, sweat dripping from his brow. You glance once more at the dais, at the lord seated like a figure carved into the stone itself. Around him swirls noise, but he remains unmoved, the axis on which the hall turns. And you realize, in a castle without gas or electricity, authority is not simply declared, it is staged, lit by fire, echoed by stone, and reinforced by every glance and gesture. As you close your eyes briefly, the fire's heat on your skin, you feel the weight of the hall's atmosphere pressing into you. To spend a night here is to live inside performance, one that never fully rests, even when the plates are empty and the songs fade. The hum of conversation softens, though the hall still vibrates with restless energy. A new layer of sound takes its place, music rising more confidently now, strings resonating, a drum keeping steady rhythm. Servants have shifted their work from platters to instruments, or perhaps traveling entertainers have stepped forward, eager to earn coin and bread by keeping weary guests awake a little longer. You lean against the rough wood of the bench, letting the song ripple over you. A lute thrums low and steady, joined by a pipe that squeals at first, then finds its note. The hall responds, voices hush, bodies lean closer, and even the restless dogs quiet, ears pricked at the change. For the first time all night, the air feels unified, as though everyone is breathing in time with the melody. Written accounts remind us that music was not decoration but necessity. In a world without radios, without recorded sound, the arrival of a minstrel transformed a hall into a theatre. The stories they sang were news, gossip, propaganda, and entertainment bound into one. A well-crafted ballad could spread a lord's glory faster than any messenger. You sense that the man at the dais understands this well, his face half lit by fire, his eyes trained on the performers, measuring the effect of every verse on the crowd. One peculiar note from history tells of jesters who doubled as spies. Their sharp tongues and sharper ears caught whispers others ignored, and their songs carried coded messages from one noble to another. You picture the jester now, bells jingling as he leaps into the firelight, perhaps hiding barbs in his jokes that only a few sharp listeners can hear. The laughter around you feels tinged with nervousness, as though everyone knows words can cut as deeply as steel. Scholars remain divided on how free entertainers truly were. Some suggest jesters had rare license to mock their masters, a safety valve for tension. Others argue their performances were carefully curated, tolerated only so long as they reinforced authority. Watching the jester tumble forward now, you see both truths. He somersaults, rising into a pose that exaggerates the lord's own stance, drawing laughter from the benches. Yet his eyes flick immediately toward the dais, gauging whether the joke has landed safely. The hall brightens with energy again. The pipe trills, the lute strums faster, and the jester begins his antics in earnest. He teases the knight who spilled his ale earlier, earning a roar of approval. He wobbles like a drunk, then collapses dramatically onto the rushes, dogs sniffing at his cap while the crowd howls. Children laugh too, their squeals echoing above the deeper voices. For a moment, the hall feels almost carefree, the harshness of stone walls softened by mirth. Yet even joy has its edges. You notice a servant slip quietly out of the hall, shoulders hunched, carrying a stack of bowls. No one spares her a glance. Her world is not laughter but duty, continuing even as others revel. You realize how fragile entertainment was, fleeting moments carved out between endless tasks. To the servants, the hall's cheer might feel like background noise, something to glance at briefly before plunging back into work. The fire blazes hotter as another log is thrown on. Sparks burst upward, catching in the smoke that pools near the rafters. The air grows hazier, your eyes stinging faintly, though the music pushes you to stay. The jester now juggles 3 apples, then 4, his bells jingling faster, his tongue darting with quips about the bishop's thin waist and the knight's rusty boots. The hall roars with laughter, yet you sense the undercurrent. Every joke is a test, every laugh a negotiation between truth and danger. From your bench, the smells are thick and layered. The roasted meat has cooled into grease, heavy and clinging. The sharper scent of spilled ale rises from the floor, soaked into the rushes. A hint of lavender drifts faintly from the tapestries, overwhelmed but not extinguished. The entire hall smells lived in, not staged, a blend of celebration and labor that clings to your clothes as surely as smoke. The minstrel shifts to a ballad, voice carrying above the lute's steady strum. The words speak of a king long gone, of victory won on a distant field. The hall leans into the story, men pounding the tables in rhythm, others nodding solemnly. This is more than a song. It is a reminder of shared identity, a weaving of memory that binds the listeners together. In a castle without printed books or glowing screens, such stories were the fabric of collective memory. You glance again at the lord. He has not moved much, but his hand drums lightly against the table in time with the song. His face betrays nothing, yet you sense he enjoys the rhythm. Authority does not laugh openly, but it listens, absorbs, controls. The hall responds as much to his stillness as to the jester's chaos. Even in play, his presence anchors the night. A curious fact floats to mind. Some feasts ended with elaborate masks, guests themselves donning costumes to act out allegories of virtue and vice. Tonight, you see no disguises, but the energy of performance is here. All the same jesters mocking, minstrels chanting, even diners pounding their cups in rhythm. The hall itself has become the play, with every person an actor on the smoky stage. The hours stretch on. The jester bows, sweat glistening on his brow. Bells quiet now. The minstrel hums one last refrain, the lute strings fading into silence. For a moment, the hall is still, as though everyone holds the same breath. Then the noise surges back, laughter, talk, the scrape of benches. The entertainment has ended, but its echo lingers, binding the crowd in shared memory. You lean back, your own breath slow, your skin warm from the fire. Without electricity, without gas, without the hum of modern life, a medieval night relies on bodies and voices, on fire and story. Here, in this hall, you've glimpsed the way joy and tension, laughter and authority, balanced precariously on every note and jest. And as the torches burn lower, you realize the night is only half done. The feast has passed, the entertainment dwindled, but the castle does not sleep so easily. Shadows deepen, whispers stir, and the long hours still lie ahead. The laughter from the jester's last tumble is still echoing in your ears when you notice the quieter corner of the hall where the servants huddle for their own meal. You drift toward it almost unconsciously, drawn less by spectacle than by curiosity. The firelight here is dimmer, the torches fewer, and the chatter lower, yet the sense of life is just as vivid. Here, the food is simpler. A pot of thick pottage sits at the center, steam curling lazily into the smoky air. Wooden bowls are passed hand to hand, each filled with ladles of grain, peas, and a scrap or two of vegetable. A few lucky ones have slices of coarse bread to dip, and one man tears his in half to share with the woman beside him. Their gratitude shows in the way they lean into the steam, savoring every bite, even as their hands tremble from fatigue. Records of the time make clear that servants rarely ate the delicacies of the Lord's table. Instead, they lived on staples, pottage, rye bread, small beer, perhaps cheese or salted fish if the stores allowed. Only when scraps were left from feasts did they taste roasted meat, and even then, it was often bones and gristle. You realize how stark the contrast is. One end of the hall gleaming with golden fowl and silver cups, the other surviving on whatever sustained the work. One unusual custom mentioned in household accounts is that some lords allowed leftover trenchers, the soaked, greasy bread plates, to be collected for the poor waiting outside the castle gates. What was refuse for one table became sustenance for another. It's humbling to imagine hunger woven so tightly into the rhythm of generosity, waste transformed into charity almost by accident. Looking at the servants now, you wonder how many times their own meals relied on such trickle-down abundance. Historians continue to debate whether castle service was enviable or miserable. On one hand, servants had access to protection within walls, to steady food, however plain, and to proximity with power. On the other, they were subject to endless labor, rigid hierarchy, and little privacy. Watching the group here, faces lit faintly by torchlight, voices hushed but steady, you see both sides. Their exhaustion is obvious, yet so too is their resilience. You notice how they eat, quickly, efficiently, barely pausing between bites. It is not a leisurely supper but a refueling, stolen minutes before duty calls again. A boy no older than 12 gulps his pottage, then rises immediately to fetch a tray, his eyes darting toward the dais as though summoned by an invisible string. Childhood, here, is not its own stage of life, but an early draft of adulthood. The smells in this corner are different too. Less garlic and roasted fat, more boiled peas and damp wool. The smoke still curls thickly from the torches, but it mingles with the earthy scent of straw and the sharper tang of sweat after a long day. You realize how these smells cling not just to clothes but to skin, hair, breath. They are the perfume of service, carried everywhere, impossible to shed. Yet in the midst of it all, a spark of humanity glows. Two women share a private joke, their laughter soft and fleeting, but genuine. A man hums along with the minstrel's fading ballad, his voice rough but earnest. Even in weariness, even in the shadows, there is warmth. The hall may separate lords from labourers, but it cannot extinguish the small comforts of companionship. Your gaze drifts to the edges of the rushes where a dog curls, licking at a discarded trencher. A servant reaches down to scratch its head absent-mindedly between bites, the gesture so natural it makes you smile. In a world of constant labour, perhaps even a dog's presence could feel like relief. Another odd truth: some servants were bound to service for life, inheriting their positions much like land. Others came and went, hired for seasons or specific tasks. The stability of the castle's rhythm relied on both the permanence of long-serving stewards and the fluidity of temporary hands. You look at the faces before you and wonder who will still be here when the next feast is held, and who will vanish into the silence of forgotten records. The hall's noise continues to swell at the other end. Mugs clink, laughter rises. The Lord's voice cuts through like a steady drumbeat. Yet here in the servants' corner, the atmosphere is softer, more human. It is the quiet pulse beneath the thunder, the breath that keeps the castle alive even when no one applauds. You feel a sudden tug of humility. To spend a night in a medieval castle is to realize that grandeur is only half the story. The other half lies here in the bowls of pottage, the tired shoulders, the brief bursts of laughter stolen between duties. Without these hands, the torches would go out, the hearth would fade, and the Lord's chair would sit in silence. A bell clangs suddenly, sharp and commanding. The servants flinch instinctively. Bowls are set aside, crumbs brushed from laps, and in moments the corner empties, the hum of their meal swallowed by the hall's larger roar. You watch them scatter, each returning to their endless tasks, and you are left with the fading warmth of their presence. The fire crackles louder now, the entertainment shifting again. But you carry the image of that corner with you, the quieter meal, the humbler food, the resilient faces. It lingers like a shadow behind the dazzle of the feast, reminding you that a castle's true strength lies not in stone or ceremony, but in the invisible work that fills every corner of its night. The laughter and noise of the hall trail behind, as you step through a smaller doorway, one that creaks on its hinges and leads into a chamber of quiet devotion. The shift is immediate and startling. Where the hall was full of firelight, chatter, and smoke, here the air is cooler, calmer, tinged with the faint sweetness of beeswax candles. This is the chapel, a space that stands apart from the worldly chaos, even within the castle's walls. The ceiling arches overhead, ribbed stone curving into shadows. The windows are narrow and high, letting in only slivers of moonlight that mingle with the glow of candles below. The flickering light paints uneven halos across the walls, illuminating painted saints whose faces are worn by centuries of smoke. Their gazes, serene yet distant, seem to follow you as you walk across the flagstones. Surviving records remind us that most castles had a chapel of some form, whether grand or modest. For the lord and his household, it was a vital space mass each morning, prayers at night, weddings, baptisms, confessions. Life's milestones passed through this quiet room, binding the sacred to the stone as firmly as the mortar itself. Even the very act of eating in the hall often began with blessings spoken here. One curious practice mentioned in chronicles is that nobles sometimes kept relics in their private chapels, bones of saints, splinters of the true cross, or other holy fragments. Some may have been genuine, others doubtful at best, but their presence offered both prestige and a sense of protection. You imagine a fragment of bone sealed in a silver reliquary, resting here on the altar, its authenticity less important than the comfort it gave to those who knelt before it. Researchers still dispute how deeply piety shaped daily castle life. Was devotion sincere, or was it another form of display, as political as the Lord's feasts? The truth likely lies between genuine faith interwoven with spectacle. Tonight, as you stand here, you sense both threads. The silence feels holy, but the placement of the chapel, central, visible, undeniable, also reminds every visitor that this household's authority was blessed from above. The air is cooler here, heavy with the smell of stone and wax. You can hear the faint drip of water somewhere in the shadows, perhaps seeping through cracks in the walls. A bench creaks as a woman kneels, her whispered prayer too soft to catch. The sound of her rosary beads clicking between her fingers becomes the rhythm of the room. You lower yourself onto another bench. The wood is hard, worn smooth by countless knees and elbows. For a moment, you let your eyes close. The hum of the great hall fades from memory, replaced by the stillness of candlelight. Yet even here, the body resists silence. Your cloak rustles, your breath sounds louder than you expect, and your stomach growls faintly from the feast. The chapel magnifies every small sound, reminding you that nothing goes unnoticed before God or before your fellow worshippers. The floor beneath your boots is colder than in the hall, stone unsoftened by rushes. It seeps upward, numbing your toes, reminding you that devotion often meant discomfort. Worship was not about ease but endurance. You shift, drawing your cloak tighter, imagining how many people through the years did the same. A soft chant begins. From a side door, a priest emerges, his robes catching the candlelight as he moves toward the altar. His voice, low and steady, fills the chamber. The Latin syllables blur together for you, alien yet hypnotic, rising and falling like waves. Those around you bow their heads, some crossing themselves, others simply closing their eyes. The chant wraps the room in rhythm, anchoring even the restless minds that drift in the shadows. It strikes you that in a castle without gas or electricity, faith was one of the few lights people carried into darkness. When the torches died, when drafts cut through blankets, when illness struck without warning, prayer was the warmth that remained. You can almost feel it now, the fragile but powerful comfort of words spoken upward. beyond stone, beyond night. Another detail clings to memory. Some chapels doubled as burial places for lords and their families. The very floor beneath you might conceal tombs, their inscriptions worn away, their presence felt more than seen. The dead lay at the heart of the castle, their stone effigies praying forever in silence, witnesses to the living who passed through each night. You wonder whose bones rest below your boots, whose memory shapes the silence that hangs here. The chant fades, the priest bows his head, the woman on the bench crosses herself, and the room exhales. A torch sputters at the doorway, reminding you of the world beyond. You stand slowly, your knees stiff from the cold, and take one last glance at the altar. The wax of the candles pools in thick rivers, hardening into pale stalactites that cling to iron stands. Their flames flicker, steady but fragile, a reminder of how delicate all light feels in this world. As you step back into the corridor, the noise of the hall returns faintly, like the distant roar of the sea. Yet the chapel clings to you, the smell of wax, the echo of chant, the image of painted saints with watchful eyes. To spend a night in a medieval castle was not only to endure cold and noise, but also to share in this fragile stillness, a space where faith gave meaning to hardship. You draw your cloak closer and move on, carrying with you the weight of whispered prayers and the quiet reminder that, even within stone walls, the soul searched for its own kind of warmth. The hush of the chapel fades behind you as you step once more into the arteries of the fortress. The corridors here are narrower, colder, and the torchlight more reluctant, as though the flames themselves are weary of the long night. You follow the faint metallic rhythm of boots striking stone, and soon you find yourself at the changing of the guard. The doorway opens onto a covered walk that hugs the inner wall of the castle. The night air pushes through arrow slits, sharp and bracing, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and wood smoke from distant cottages outside the walls. Here, in the in-between, soldiers gather, some shrugging on cloaks, others loosening straps of armor, their breaths clouding in the frigid air. Medieval documents describe how guards rotated through the night in strict shifts, a rhythm that rarely faltered. Their work was endless vigilance, watching the walls, pacing the battlements, scanning the black countryside for movement. In many castles, bells or horns signaled the changing hours, breaking the monotony and reminding men that even in darkness, time marched on. Tonight, the sound is boots and murmurs, the scrape of metal, the weary sigh of men who have carried steel too long. One curious anecdote survives in chronicles of garrisons. Sometimes, guards bribed their fellows to take an extra shift so they could snatch a few hours of sleep or sneak into the town below. The practice was risky, punishments for negligence could be brutal, but it hints at the humanity behind the armor. You glance at the men here, rubbing their hands, yawning behind helms, and you wonder how many longed for escape even as they fastened swords at their hips. Specialists still disagree on how disciplined these watches truly were. Some argue that the fear of raids kept guards sharp, their discipline unwavering. Others suggest that boredom dulled the edge of vigilance, that men slouched against walls, dozed in towers, or distracted themselves with dice and gossip. Standing here now, you see both sides. Some men pace briskly, eyes sharp on the dark fields beyond, while others slump on benches, muttering half-heartedly about the cold. The smells of this space are unmistakable leather, warmed by sweat, oil rubbed into steel, the faint bitterness of stale ale lingering on breath. The air carries a tang of iron, the ghost of weapons freshly sharpened. Your nose wrinkles at it, but the men seem immune, their lives steeped in such odours. One man leans back against the wall, his mail shirt clinking softly. He tilts a flask to his lips, then offers it to his comrade. They share a muted laugh, one that sounds more like resignation than cheer. The flask disappears quickly as a superior strides past, his boots striking sharp against the stone, his hand resting deliberately on the hilt of his sword. Hierarchy follows everywhere, even into the night watch. Above, the battlements stretch dark against the sky, A shout echoes faintly from a tower, answered by another. It is not alarm, only routine, a signal exchanged to prove that men are awake, alert. Still, the sound prickles along your skin. In the quiet countryside, each voice feels magnified, bouncing off stone, lingering long after it fades. The draught bites at your cheeks, sharper with each gust. You pull your cloak close and imagine what it would be to stand here for hours, armor digging into shoulders, wind clawing at your ears, eyes straining at endless black fields. Fire might warm the hall, but up here the night is merciless. Vigilance comes at the price of comfort. Another soldier adjusts his helmet, muttering a curse about the weight. He stomps his feet, trying to bring life back into them. You picture him at dawn, boots frozen stiff, fingers cracked from cold. Yet he stands, as countless others did, because the castle's security rests on his persistence. An odd thought surfaces. Some castles employ dogs, or even geese as additional night watch. Their senses, sharper than men's, could detect intruders long before a human guard stirred. The idea of geese honking wildly in the dark makes you smile, but the practicality is undeniable. Perhaps, somewhere beyond the wall, wings rustle tonight, ready to raise an alarm. You step closer to the arrow slits. Beyond them lies the countryside, a black expanse dotted only with the faintest sparks of fire from huts or shepherds' camps. The silence there is immense, pressing, yet you know it can be broken at any moment by hoofbeats, shouts, or the sudden flare of torches. The guards know it too. That is why their shifts never truly rest. The men preparing to leave look no less weary than those taking their place. They tug at straps, hand over spears, exchange muttered words that sound like prayers disguised as complaints. One scratches his beard and stretches, his back cracking audibly. The other pulls his cloak higher and squares his shoulders, as if bracing against not just the cold but the hours of monotony to come. The clang of armor fills the chamber as another group passes, their helmets under their arms, their hair plastered with sweat. Their faces are flushed, not from heat but from exhaustion. They vanish down the corridor, toward whatever straw pallets await them. You imagine how quickly they'll collapse, grateful for even a few hours' rest before the bell pulls them back here. The space empties, then refills as the next watch takes position. The rhythm is endless, the heartbeat of the castle at night. One group leaving, another arriving, the cycle unbroken hour after hour. You can almost hear the ticking of time, not from a clock but from boots, breaths, and sighs. The torches gutter low, their smoke stinging your eyes. One guard lifts a fresh torch from the wall and replaces it, the flame leaping briefly before settling into steady glow. That light feels precious, fragile, a reminder that without it, the entire watch would be swallowed in darkness. You shiver at the thought. And so the guards settle into their new shift. Some stand stiff, scanning the black horizon. Others pace slowly, warming themselves with movement. Their silhouettes merge with the shadows, their presence both reassuring and unsettling. This is the other half of castle life, the vigilance that never sleeps, the weary men whose silence and footsteps keep the walls safe. As you step away, the sounds of their routine linger in your ears, the scrape of boots, the mutter of voices, the metallic sigh of armor. You leave them behind, but you know they will remain, hour after hour, watching, waiting, until dawn finally breaks. You turn away from the guard's steady rhythm and drift down a side passage, one that leads away from the torchlit routine of vigilance and into darker, quieter recesses of the castle. The moment you step through the arch, the air thickens, heavy with damp and dust. Here the torches burn fewer and farther between, and every flicker of flame feels swallowed by the stone. It takes only a few paces for you to sense that you are entering the places most people prefer to forget. The smell reaches you first, a sour blend of wet straw, old food, and something acrid that makes your throat tighten. You follow it into a chamber whose corners retreat into shadow, and there you catch movement, small, quick, unashamed. Rats. They scatter when the light shifts, their claws scratching against stone, tails whipping across the rushes. For a moment you are frozen, the realization settling in that this castle, for all its grandeur above, is shared with creatures who thrive in its darkness. Archaeological evidence confirms what your senses tell you. Castles were infested with rodents. No amount of servants sweeping rushes or scattering herbs could keep them entirely away. They lived in the walls, under the floors, near the food stores. To medieval people, they were not shocking intruders but persistent neighbors, endured rather than conquered. You picture a noblewoman upstairs sipping spiced wine, even as rats scrabble in the chamber below her. One curious practice, recorded in household accounts, involved scattering handfuls of mint or juniper among the rushes to mask the stench and deter vermin. The herbs did little to stop the gnawing, but their fragrance covered the worst of the odor. Tonight you notice faint traces of something sharp and green beneath the sourness, as though centuries-old mint still clings to the cracks of the floor. Researchers remain divided on how much of a nuisance these pests were considered. Some argue that infestations were accepted as normal, ignored unless they grew extreme. Others point to chronicles where rats were associated with plague, famine, or divine punishment, sparking fear and superstition. Standing here, torchlight trembling against the wall, you sense both truths: acceptance of the scurrying bodies and unease at what their presence might portend. You crouch to study the rushes. They are damp, darkened with stains of spilled ale and grease, littered with bones too small or too gnawed to have been worth saving. The rats dart between them with practiced ease, claiming what the feast left behind. You can almost hear the faint gnash of teeth as they gnaw in the shadows, a reminder that in the quiet hours after laughter fades, hunger continues in many forms. The walls here are clammy to the touch. Water seeps down in beads, leaving streaks of dark green moss that glisten under the torchlight. You place a hand against the stone and feel the chill soak into your skin, as though the castle itself were exhaling cold. No tapestry softens this chamber. No heraldic banners remind you of nobility. This is the underbelly of stone life, raw and unvarnished. A sudden squeal pierces the silence as two rats fight over a scrap. Their bodies collide, tumbling against the wall, then vanish into a crack. The sound echoes longer than the moment lasts, bouncing off the stone until you half expect the fight to continue unseen. You wonder how many nights were filled with such noises, breaking sleep with sudden cries from creatures unseen. And rats are not the only inhabitants. From the rafters above you hear the flutter of wings. A bat, disturbed by your torch, swoops once before, vanishing into darkness. Its leathery rustle is fleeting, but it leaves you uneasy. The castle is not only a human dwelling but a shelter for whatever creatures can claim its corners. You imagine owls nesting in towers, spiders weaving webs across arrow slits, insects crawling along wooden beams. To live here was to coexist constantly with the non-human world. An odd superstition recorded in folklore claimed that rats deserting a castle signaled its doom. If you saw them fleeing en masse, it meant siege, famine, or fire was coming. You glance at the scattering tails again, and wonder if medieval minds read omens in every skitter. Perhaps even tonight, some servant lying awake in his straw bed listens to the rats and worries what they portend. The torch sputters, and the shadows crowd closer. For a moment, you imagine what it would be to stand here with no light at all, surrounded by unseen movement, every squeak amplified, every draught carrying smells of damp and waste. Your skin prickles at the thought. Darkness in the medieval castle was not simply the absence of light, it was an entire world of sound and sensation pressing against you, alive and indifferent. You take a step farther, your boot crunching on something brittle. Looking down, you see a scattering of bones, small and pale, likely discarded from the kitchens. They are gnawed clean, polished by tiny teeth. The sight makes you shiver, not because of what they are, but because of what they mean. Nothing in the castle goes unused. Every scrap, every corner, Every ounce of life is consumed by someone or something. In the distance, faintly, you hear the hall again, muffled laughter, the thrum of music, but here it feels a world away. This chamber belongs not to lords or knights, but to vermin and shadow. And yet, it is part of the same castle, as real and necessary as the dais and throne. Grandeur cannot exist without its opposite. Light cannot shine without darkness pressing in. You step back toward the corridor, eager to leave the stench and the scratching behind. But as you glance once more at the shadows, you realize that anyone who spent a night in a medieval castle would have known this side of it too: the damp, the vermin, the unrelenting closeness of creatures who thrived in the same spaces as people. To pretend otherwise would be to imagine fantasy, not history. The torch flares as you re-enter the corridor, its warmth chasing the chill from your fingers. The noises fade behind you, swallowed by the steady heartbeat of the castle. But the memory of the scurrying remains, a reminder that even in stone sanctuaries, survival was always shared and never clean. The memory of scurrying claws still tingles in your ears when you reach another door, this one broader, heavier, carved from thick oak and braced with iron bands. You push, and it yields with a long groan, opening into a chamber dimly lit by a single torch sputtering in the wall. The door creaks shut behind you, sealing off the corridor's draught. You are in a bedchamber, or at least what passes for one in a medieval castle. The first impression is size. The room is not vast like the hall, but compared to a servant's pallet or guard's bench, it feels cavernous. The ceiling arches upward into dark beams, and a narrow window cut into the stone admits only a sliver of night air. The torch's glow makes the walls ripple with shadows, and you realize that privacy here is less about solitude than about separation from the noise beyond. Surviving inventories from noble households describe chambers like this with a kind of pride. A bed with carved posts, curtains of wool or linen, a chest for clothing, perhaps even a chair or two. Tonight, you see much the same. The bed dominates the space, its frame heavy and dark, its posts thick enough to double as supports for hanging cloaks. Curtains hang limply around it, drawn partly aside, promising warmth and concealment. Beside it sits a chest bound with iron, its lock glinting faintly in the torchlight. One odd detail from period sources reveals that noble beds were often shared not only by spouses, but also by favoured guests, children, or even attendants. Privacy as we know it was rare, and warmth mattered more than space. You glance at the bed now, and wonder how many bodies it has held across its lifetime, how many secrets whispered behind its curtains. Historians continue to puzzle over how comfortable these beds really were. To modern eyes, they seem impressive, large, curtained, stuffed with layers of straw or feather. Yet records of fleas and lice abound, and accounts describe nobles scratching themselves raw despite silks and furs. Comfort, it seems, was relative. You can picture a lord sinking into this mattress with relief, only to wake at dawn covered in bites. The smell of the room is distinct from the hall. Here the smoke lingers less, but the scent of wool, leather, and aged wood dominates. The air is close, faintly sour from bodies and bedding, but it carries a kind of intimacy. You take a deep breath and imagine falling asleep surrounded not by open laughter but by the heavy silence of stone. The bed calls to you, though you hesitate. The straw-stuffed mattress sags unevenly, and the blankets are coarse to the touch, woven from wool that scratches your skin. You run your hand over the fabric and feel its roughness, softened only by years of use. It is not luxury as you know it, but compared to the cold floor, it is wealth itself. A small fire smoulders in the hearth across the room, throwing out more smoke than heat. Its embers glow faintly, painting the stone with a dull red sheen. You kneel beside it, rubbing your hands against the weak warmth. The logs are nearly spent, and without a servant to tend them, the fire will fade soon. You realize how quickly chill will creep back into the chamber, even with heavy blankets pulled tight. The furnishings tell their own story. The iron-bound chest likely holds clothing, woolen tunics, linen undergarments, perhaps a fur-lined cloak. A narrow table bears a candlestick, its wax pooled in hardened rivers down the side. A jug of water sits beside it, though the liquid smells faintly stagnant when you lift the lid. A single comb rests there too, its teeth worn from use, a reminder that even grooming was precious labor. One curious superstition about bedrooms in this period involved the placement of the bed itself. Some believed sleeping with one's head facing north invited illness, while others insisted east was the proper orientation for health and divine favor. You look at the bed's position against the wall and wonder whether it reflects piety, practicality, or simple chance. Perhaps the Lord who ordered it cared less for omens than for the draught that whistled through the narrow window. You move closer to the bed and pull the curtain aside. The straw rustles under the blanket, releasing a musty smell. You imagine slipping under it, hearing every shift amplified in the stillness. Sleep here would not be silence but a chorus of noises, the wind moaning through the arrow slit, the crackle of the dying fire, the shuffle of rats in the walls, the muffled laughter still drifting faintly from the hall. Researchers remain divided on how much privacy noble chambers truly offered. Some accounts describe them as sanctuaries where lords withdrew from the demands of the hall. Others note that attendants often slept in the same room, ready to rise at a word, leaving little space for solitude. As you stand here, staring at the bed, you sense again that duality, a space set apart, yet never entirely your own. The torch sputters, threatening to go out. Shadows leap across the beams overhead, and for a moment you imagine faces in the wood, grim and watchful. You blink, and they vanish, leaving only blackened knots and cracks. Still, the impression lingers. The castle is never truly empty. Its silence carries the weight of all who lived and died within it. The chill creeps back into your hands, and you rub them together. You think of the servant who will come later to stoke the fire, of the chamber pot tucked discreetly near the bed, of the constant negotiation between comfort and hardship. To spend a night here is not to live in luxury, but to endure a kind of privileged discomfort better than most, but still marked by draughts, pests, and uneasy sleep. You let the curtain fall back into place, its fabric sighing softly. The bedchamber is quiet again, waiting for its occupant, waiting for the long hours of night to pass. You step back toward the door, your torch flickering low, and glance once more at the heavy bed. It looks inviting, but you know rest is not so simple here. In the world of stone walls and smoky fires, sleep is always provisional, always fragile. The door creaks as you push it open. Cold air rushes in from the corridor, and you shiver as you step through. The chamber vanishes behind you, swallowed by its own silence, while the castle's heartbeat continues on elsewhere. The night is far from over. The door closes with a groan, and you find yourself back in the dim corridor, moving slowly with your torch casting long, jagged shadows. The castle grows quieter now, as though the stones themselves are settling into their slumber. Yet when you reach the next chamber, you realize that quiet does not mean comfort. You push against another heavy oak door, and it yields reluctantly, revealing the bed you have been promised for the night. At first glance it seems inviting, a broad wooden frame, a mattress rising high above the floor, thick blankets folded roughly across it. But when you step closer, the illusion falters. The mattress is stuffed with straw, uneven and lumpy, sagging in places where the stuffing has shifted. The blankets are coarse wool, scratchy to the touch, carrying the faint smell of lanolin and smoke. You run your hand along the bedding and find it rough enough to rasp against your palm. Luxury, by the standards of the day, still falls far short of comfort. Written inventories from noble households often list such beds proudly feather beds when available, straw pallets when not. Yet contemporary complaints remind us that these beds were breeding grounds for pests. Fleas and lice thrived in the seams of straw mattresses, their presence so constant that medieval people barely mentioned them, as if too obvious to note. Tonight, as you sit gingerly on the edge, You feel the straw shift beneath you, rustling faintly, and it's easy to imagine the small, unwelcome inhabitants already stirring. One curious note from household manuals is that straw mattresses were sometimes renewed only once or twice a year, their old stuffing pulled out and replaced after months of use. In the meantime, people might sprinkle herbs, lavender, pennyroyal, wormwood among the straw to mask odors and discourage vermin. You sniff the air now and think you catch a faint sweetness under the must, a remnant of such practice, though it hardly disguises the reality. Experts remain divided on how restful sleep really was in these conditions. Some suggest that nobles, accustomed to such bedding, felt no discomfort. Others argue that constant itching, the cold of draughty rooms, and the noises of the castle made deep rest nearly impossible. Sitting here now, you suspect the latter. The fire in the hearth is small, the draughts insistent, and the straw prickles even through the blanket. To call this restful requires a generous imagination. You lie back tentatively, feeling the straw shift under your weight. The mattress crackles softly, as though whispering. The smell of dried grass rises faintly, mingling with the smoke curling from the hearth. At first the uneven lumps dig into your back. Then you shift, seeking the least uncomfortable hollow. The blanket scratches your chin, heavy yet failing to block the cold that slips easily into the room. The sounds return to you in the stillness. Faint footsteps echo in the corridor, followed by a door creaking open somewhere down the hall. A servant whispers, then silence falls again. You hear the wind pressing at the shutter, rattling it faintly against the stone. From deeper within the walls comes the scurry of unseen paws. This is not silence as you know it. It is a layering of quiet sounds, each one a reminder that you are never alone in this building. You turn on your side, the straw poking at your hip. Your hand brushes the curtain hanging from the bed frame, a thin woolen cloth meant to trap warmth. It rustles softly, smelling faintly of dust. You draw it closer, imagining how much it matters on winter nights when the fire burns out. In wealthier households, curtains were lined with fur or embroidered richly, but here the fabric is plain, its only function survival. A spark pops in the hearth, sending a faint glow across the floor. You glance toward it, reminded of how precious such fire was. Without electricity, without gas, this ember is the single anchor against the cold. If it dies before dawn, the room will be as frigid as the stone corridor outside. You pull the blanket higher, feeling it scratch against your cheek, and realize that even with wealth, sleep is never simple here. One peculiar superstition recorded in folklore insisted that restless sleep in such beds was caused not by fleas but by spirits, nightmares embodied as creatures that pressed upon the chest. People left charms or prayers beside their beds to ward them off. You glance at the small wooden crucifix hanging near the bed frame and wonder if its presence was meant as much for protection from pests as from demons. The torch burns lower, leaving only the fire's glow. Shadows creep farther across the walls, their edges sharp and shifting. You roll again, trying to find ease, and the mattress groans as straw shifts beneath you. Comfort seems elusive, but exhaustion will win eventually. That, perhaps, was the truth of medieval sleep. Not comfort, but surrender. You think of the hall still buzzing faintly in the distance, the guards pacing on the walls, the servants huddled in corners. Each person finds rest where they can in straw pallets, on wooden benches, curled in cloaks near dying fires. The noble's bed is larger, softer, but still prey to the same cold, the same pests, the same restless night. Equality, in its harshest form, comes through discomfort. You close your eyes briefly. The smell of straw and wool fills your nose. The scratch of the blanket presses into your skin. You hear another faint scurry behind the wall, and then the low sigh of wind through the shutter. This is what it means to spend a night in a castle. Not romance, not grandeur, but the gritty reality of sleeping on straw in a chamber that never truly rests. You shift once more, pulling the curtain tight around you, and the room grows darker still. The fire sinks lower, the draughts grow sharper, and the straw whispers beneath you as the long night begins its slow stretch forward. The curtains close around you like a cocoon, but the illusion of safety fades almost immediately. The fire in the hearth has sunk into a bed of embers, glowing faintly red, but giving little warmth. Already you feel the chill sliding back into the room, slipping under the wool blanket and wrapping itself around your body. Your breath fogs faintly in the dark. You pull the curtain tighter, and still the draught pushes through every gap. Written accounts from medieval households remark often on the battle against cold. Walls 3 feet thick were no match for winter winds. The stones themselves seemed to drink warmth greedily, leaving chambers perpetually damp and icy. Tapestries, blankets, and even fur-lined clothing could only do so much. You realize, lying here, that comfort was measured not by true warmth but by whether you could keep the chill at bay long enough to sleep. An unusual piece of advice from a 14th century household manual recommends sleeping in groups, with family or servants sharing the same bed for warmth. Not from affection alone, but necessity. You imagine bodies pressed together here, breath mingling in the dark, each person grateful for the heat of another. The solitary bed might look grand, but in practice, solitude was often an indulgence too costly to maintain. Scholars are still divided on how fires were managed in such rooms overnight. Some argue that small hearths burned low until dawn, tended by servants at intervals. Others suggest fires were left to fade, leaving sleepers huddled under blankets until morning. Judging by the embers before you, untended and weakening, you suspect the latter. The night stretches long, and the cold will only grow sharper. The sounds of the room amplify in the quiet. You hear the faint crackle of embers, the rustle of straw beneath your shifting weight, and most of all, the wind. It presses at the shutter, rattling it in irregular bursts, sometimes a soft sigh, sometimes a sharp bang that startles you awake again. The castle is not silent. It is alive with noises that creep into the edges of your rest. You shift again, trying to find a hollow in the straw that does not jab at your hip. The blanket scratches against your chin, irritating your skin. You scratch absent-mindedly and then pause, wondering whether fleas already stir in the bedding. The thought makes you itch more, and soon you are shifting again, restless. Sleep feels far away. The smell of the room thickens in the dark. Without the brighter flames of the hearth, the lingering odors become stronger. The must of straw, the sour tang of wool dampened by years of use, and faintly, the musk of unwashed bodies that have slept here before you. You inhale deeply and find it oddly grounding. This is not the sterile air of modern comfort, but the raw scent of life as it was, imperfect and persistent. From the corridor comes the muffled thud of boots, a guard perhaps, or a servant carrying out a late task. His steps fade quickly, leaving you with the echo of his presence. For a moment you wonder if the castle ever truly rests. Even when chambers fall quiet, someone, somewhere, keeps moving guards on the wall, servants at the hearth, animals in the stables. The night is a patchwork of human effort stretched thin across endless stone. A peculiar superstition once held that cold draughts in the night were the breath of spirits, invisible visitors who wandered the halls when fires died. People hung charms above their beds, or muttered prayers before sleep, hoping to keep such visitors at bay. You glance at the wooden crucifix near your bed, and wonder whether it was meant for fleas, for spirits, or for both. Your eyes grow heavy, yet the cold keeps tugging you back. You curl tighter, drawing your knees up under the blanket, trying to trap your own body heat. The straw shifts noisily beneath you, scratching and rustling with every move. Sleep here is a negotiation, not a gift. You must bargain with cold, with pests, with noise, until finally exhaustion outweighs discomfort. And just when your body begins to surrender, another sound intrudes. A dog howls faintly from the courtyard below, its cry long and mournful. A guard's voice answers, sharp and commanding. Then silence falls again. but the howl lingers in your ears, a reminder that outside the warmth of the hall, night is full of unease. The curtain flutters as a draft pushes through, and you feel the chill crawl across your face. You pull the blanket higher, covering your nose, breathing through the wool. The scent of lanolin fills your nostrils, oily and earthy, but it blocks the sharp air. Slowly, despite the discomfort, your breathing steadies. The castle creaks faintly around you, wood settling, stone groaning. You wonder if medieval sleepers ever grew used to such sounds, or if they too lay awake, cataloguing every whisper in the dark. Exhaustion presses harder, and your eyes close again. You picture the hall still faintly lit, the guards pacing above, the chapel candles flickering. All these pieces continue even as you lie here, trying to surrender to rest. The castle is not a home in the modern sense, it is a machine, every part moving even when its people sleep. The embers crack once more, a sharp pop that startles you. Then the glow fades further, and the room grows darker still. You tighten the curtain around you, burrow deeper into the scratchy blankets, and let your breath grow slow. Cold, restless, imperfect. But finally, you begin to slip into the uneasy rhythm of medieval sleep. The half-sleep you drift into is fragile, and it doesn't last. A noise jerks you back low, guttural, carried faintly through the shuttered window. A dog howling again, long and steady, its cry cutting across the night. For a moment you lie still, heart quickened, waiting. The howl rises once more, joined by the bark of another, sharper this time, closer. The sound is enough to remind you that a medieval castle, even at night, never lies in silence. The dogs are not alone. From somewhere within the walls comes the faint scuttle of claws, rats, or perhaps mice, racing unseen. Their tiny feet tap like whispers on stone, then vanish into silence again. A gust rattles the shutter, followed by the faint creak of wood in the rafters. You shift uneasily beneath your wool blanket, the straw mattress crunching as though it too wants to remind you of its presence. Sleep is a battle, and tonight the noises are winning. Contemporary chronicles note that dogs were essential in castles, not just for hunting but for guarding. Their barks could rouse sleeping soldiers faster than any bell. Yet these same records admit how often false alarms plagued the night. Dogs barking at shadows, at foxes prowling the ditches, even at the movements of owls. The very animals meant to safeguard peace could also shatter it, leaving men and women lying awake, ears straining for what might come next. One odd detail mentioned in a household roll describes how some castles tied geese near the gates at night. Geese, with their loud honks and sharp eyes, were considered better than dogs at noticing intruders. You imagine the eerie sound of wings flapping in the dark, of a goose screaming into the night while armored men stirred awake. Perhaps tonight, beneath the howling of dogs, there is also the restless rustle of feathers. Scholars are still unsure whether medieval sleepers achieved deep rest at all. Some argue that segmented sleep was the norm, a first stretch of slumber before midnight, then wakefulness in the middle of the night, followed by a second sleep until dawn. Listening to the chorus of sounds pressing through the walls, you sense why. Who could rest deeply with dogs howling, shutters rattling, and vermin scratching nearby? Perhaps the rhythms of broken sleep were not flaws but adaptations to the noise and vulnerability of the night. You pull the blanket higher, wool scratching against your cheek. The cold has crept in fully now, filling every gap, gnawing at your toes through the straw. You curl tighter, knees drawn up, hoping your own warmth will be enough. But the noises refuse to let you forget where you are. Another howl, shorter this time. Then the thump of boots, guards shifting above on the battlements. A murmur of voices carries faintly down, half heard, like ghosts pacing overhead. The smell of the chamber grows thicker as the fire dies completely. Smoke clings stubbornly, mixing with the sour tang of damp wool. The straw beneath you smells of dry grass, tinged faintly with mildew. You exhale into the blanket, inhaling your own warmth, trying to block the rest. For a moment it works, until another sound intrudes, a faint rustle from the corner. You freeze. The curtain blocks your view, but your ears sharpen. A soft scratching, then silence. Perhaps only a rat, but in the dark, imagination does the rest. One peculiar superstition claimed that night noises were not merely animals or drafts, but spirits, restless souls unable to find peace. People believed that the dead wandered castles, their footsteps echoing through corridors, their whispers mistaken for the creak of wood. Amulets, charms, and prayers were kept close at night, meant to guard against unseen presences. You glance again at the small crucifix near your bed, and wonder how much comfort it gave to those who lay awake hearing the same sounds centuries ago. The minutes stretch slowly, each one punctuated by another interruption. The shutter rattles again. A horse stamps in the stable below, its neigh muffled but insistent. A guard shouts something indistinct from the tower, his voice sharp in the stillness. Then silence falls for a moment, only to be broken by the cough of someone in the corridor, walking past with a torch. Light flickers faintly through the crack under your door, then disappears again. You realize how porous this chamber truly island. The stone walls feel impenetrable by day, yet at night, every sound seeps through, every draught carries in, every small creature finds its way inside. To sleep here is not to be enclosed, but to be surrounded by people, by animals, by the restless night itself. Your body grows heavier with exhaustion, yet your mind resists. The noises come and go in waves, each one tugging you back from the edge of rest. You wonder how medieval people endured this nightly. Did they grow used to it, the way city dwellers now grow used to traffic and sirens? Or did they wake often, muttering complaints into scratchy blankets, their eyes heavy long before dawn? The dogs quiet at last, though you can still hear them panting faintly in the distance. The shutter bangs once more, then falls still. The scratching in the wall subsides. For a brief moment, the silence is deep enough to let your muscles unclench. You breathe slowly, your body sinking further into the straw, the rough blanket heavy on your chest. But even in this fragile calm, the awareness lingers. The castle at night is never empty, never silent. It breathes, creaks, howls, and whispers. To lie here is to share the bed not just with straw and wool, but with every sound that presses through stone. You close your eyes again, surrendering slowly. The noises will return, but for now, exhaustion outweighs unease. And so you drift, half asleep, in the company of dogs, rats, guards, and whispers, the night stretching on around you like a restless companion. Sleep, when it comes, is light and uneasy, and yet the castle has a way of reminding you of your body's needs. At some indeterminate hour, you wake with a dull pressure in your belly, a reminder that food and drink, no matter how humble or rich, eventually demand release. You lie still for a moment, reluctant to move. The blanket is heavy on your chest, and the air beyond its woolen cocoon feels icy. But necessity is stronger than comfort. With a groan, you push the blanket aside, the straw mattress rustling noisily beneath you. The chamber is darker now, the torch long extinguished. Only a faint glow lingers in the hearth, embers dim as dying stars. The curtain around the bed sways slightly as you move, and the cold slaps at your skin the moment it parts. You pull your cloak over your shoulders, fumbling blindly for the small object you know must be near the bed, the chamber pot. Contemporary inventories frequently listed such vessels, simple ceramic or pewter bowls, sometimes even carved wood. They were as essential as the bed itself, for no one in their right mind wanted to stumble through freezing corridors to the latrine tower in the middle of the night. Tonight, your hand brushes the familiar cool rim of glazed pottery beneath the bed frame, and you pull it forward with care. One curious account from a castle steward describes how chamber pots were often emptied each morning by servants, their contents sometimes flung out of windows into the moat or ditch below. The phrase, garderobe, a shouted warning in certain towns, was meant to keep pedestrians from being splattered. Within the castle walls, the task fell to scullions, who carried the pots away with pinched expressions and little thanks. You imagine the poor servant trudging through corridors at dawn, arms aching from the weight of dozens of pots, their contents sloshing ominously with every step. Researchers still disagree on how common latrine towers, or garderobes, were in smaller castles. Some argue they were standard features, narrow shafts emptying into cesspits below. Others note that only wealthier lords could afford to maintain them, and even then, the stench made them less than desirable. In either case, the chamber pot remained indispensable, especially on stormy nights when climbing a spiral stair to a freezing shaft was far less appealing than ducking under a blanket again. You set the pot down gingerly on the rush-strewn floor, the faint scrape echoing far louder than you'd like. The smell rises quickly once you lift the lid sharp, acrid, unavoidable. You wrinkle your nose and glance instinctively toward the door, though no one is there. Privacy, in this world, is limited even in a bedchamber, yet the act is universal. Lords and ladies, servants and guards all relied on the same crude solutions. The stone walls might separate them, but their needs were identical. The rushes beneath your feet crunch softly as you shift. They too play their part in this cycle, soaking up what might spill, disguising odors with herbs strewn among them. But you know too well their double edge. The same rushes that mask smells also hide pests, giving rats and fleas a ready home. In the dim glow of embers, you imagine them watching, waiting, always near. The cold cuts sharper now that you are uncovered. You shiver, tugging your cloak tighter, your breath rising in pale clouds. You think briefly of the servants who must wake before dawn to collect and scrub these vessels, their noses stung by the stench, their hands reddened by icy water. Their work was invisible, but vital. Without it, the castle would drown in its own filth. An odd superstition clings to your thoughts as you settle the pot back into place. Some medieval households believed that keeping one's chamber pot near the head of the bed warded off evil spirits. The logic is unclear, perhaps. The smell was thought to repel more than just people. You chuckle softly in the dark, imagining spirits offended enough to drift elsewhere. The silence that follows is heavy. Outside, the wind rattles the shutter again, and you hear a faint drip, drip, drip from somewhere within the stone. Water seeping down a wall, perhaps, or rain filtering through the roof tiles. The sounds mingle with the crackle of a last ember, weaving into the strange lullaby of the castle night. You crawl back into bed, sliding under the coarse blanket with relief. The straw mattress greets you with another crunch, shifting uncomfortably beneath your weight. You pull the curtain closed again, though the cold still creeps in at the edges. For a moment you lie awake, staring into the dark, your body slowly warming once more. And as your breathing steadies, you realize something simple but profound. For all the grandeur of stone towers and great halls, life inside a castle was still tethered to the same ordinary rhythms as life in a peasant's hut. Eat, drink, relieve, sleep, wake. The difference lay only in the size of the walls, the number of servants, and the degree of discomfort tolerated as privilege. You close your eyes again. The smell of straw rises, the scratch of wool itches at your chin, and the faint gurgle of the chamber pot seeps into your awareness. Yet exhaustion is heavier now, and soon your thoughts drift, carried once more into the uneasy embrace of medieval sleep. You wake again, not to the pressure of your body this time, but to the sound of movement beyond the door. At first it is faint footsteps in the corridor, hushed voices, the shuffle of cloth, but soon it grows louder, closer, until you realize servants are beginning their morning work long before dawn. To them, night is no excuse for rest. The castle is a living body, and they are the ones who keep its heart beating while the rest of it sleeps. The door creaks open just enough for a sliver of light to slip in. A boy barely in his teens enters, carrying a bundle of kindling. He does not see you at first, his eyes focused on the hearth where last night's embers have almost died. With quick, practiced movements, he kneels, arranges the wood, and blows gently until the faintest glow swells again. Sparks leap, then flames catch, and soon the room begins to breathe warmth once more. He does not linger. Before you can speak, he is gone, leaving behind the scent of smoke and fresh wood. Medieval records remind us that servants' days began well before sunrise. Cooks rose to stoke kitchen fires, laundresses filled buckets from wells, stable boys mucked stalls, and pages lit chambers like this one. Their work was endless and invisible, noticed only when neglected. You realize, lying here, that your comfort depends entirely on the unseen labor of others. A curious detail from household accounts notes that even noble children often served in other households as pages, learning discipline by rising early to perform menial tasks. It was training disguised as servitude. Perhaps the boy who lit your fire is not simply a servant but a noble in miniature, learning obedience with each armful of wood. Historians continue to argue about whether this relentless rhythm left room for joy. Some say servants lived in misery, exhausted by demands. Others point to evidence of camaraderie. Songs sung while scrubbing floors, jokes whispered during long tasks. As you listen to the muffled chatter outside your chamber, you sense both truths. The voices are weary but not joyless, carrying the rhythm of people who know their burdens but still find ways to endure them. The sounds multiply as the castle stirs awake. Somewhere down the corridor, buckets clank against stone. A woman's voice scolds sharply, followed by the softer whimper of a child or young apprentice. The air carries the smell of fresh rushes being scattered on the floor, their herbal sharpness almost enough to mask the sourness of yesterday's waste. You imagine servants moving in pairs, sweeping out old straw and laying down new, their hands raw but steady. Your blanket scratches as you shift, pulling it tighter. You wonder how many of these workers slept at all. Many likely dozed in corners, on pallets near the kitchen fire, or even upright on benches. Yet by custom, they are expected to appear alert, ready, invisible once more when the Lord stirs. Fatigue is their constant companion, but it earns no sympathy. The corridor grows busier. You hear the soft thud of loaves being carried from the bakehouse, their yeasty scent drifting faintly into your chamber. A bucket spills, water splashing across stone, and someone curses under their breath before hurrying away. Another pair of feet scampers past, lighter, quicker, a child perhaps sent to fetch something before the mistress of the household notices its absence. One odd but telling tidbit comes to mind. Castle kitchens sometimes kept a hierarchy of dogs as carefully ranked as the people. Some were hunting hounds, pampered and fed scraps from the lord's table, while others lingered near scullions, living on bones and scraps. You wonder if the bark you heard earlier belonged to one of these working dogs, woven into the rhythm of service as tightly as the people themselves. The fire crackles stronger now, pushing back the chill. You sit up, the straw mattress crackling beneath you, and glance toward the door. You can almost see the line of servants hurrying past, each one with a task: sweeping, fetching, kindling, scrubbing. The castle at night was restless, but the castle at dawn is tireless, shifting into a new tempo of activity that will not ease until long after dusk. The smell of smoke thickens again as another torch is lit in the corridor. The voices blend into a hum, punctuated by sharper notes. A command here, a scolding there, the clatter of pots from below. These sounds are less startling than the night's howls and scratches, but they press just as heavily. The castle never rests, and even in its quietest hours, someone's labor keeps it alive. You imagine, just for a moment, being one of them, rising in the dark, stumbling through cold halls with arms full of wood, knees aching from scrubbing, fingers raw from lye. Sleep would come only in snatches, stolen minutes rather than full hours. The noble straw mattress may scratch, but at least it holds the promise of continuity. For the servants, rest is never certain. A peculiar belief lingers in some folklore, that servants' sighs in the early morning were unlucky to hear, omens of hardship to come. You think of the weary mutter you heard in the corridor, and wonder whether someone centuries ago would have crossed themselves at the sound. The bustle grows until it is no longer ignorable. The castle is awake now, its heartbeat loud and insistent. The footsteps, the voices, the smells of smoke and bread all converge into the living pulse of stone and wood. You pull the blanket closer for one last moment, knowing that to truly spend a night in a medieval castle is not just to endure the noises of the dark, but also to wake with the servants to the endless rhythm of labor. Your eyelids grow heavy again, tempted by the warmth of the rekindled fire, but the corridor is alive, the world pressing forward, and you realize the night is over even if the sun has not yet risen. Exhaustion lingers in your limbs, but dawn does not wait. Neither do the people who keep the castle alive. You linger under the rough blanket for a moment longer, listening to the rising hum outside your chamber. The fire crackles now with fresh life, its glow stronger against the stone, but the air still carries a sting of cold. You push the curtain aside and sit up, feet meeting the rush-strewn floor. The straw crunches under your weight, faintly damp in spots where last night's chill crept in. You rise slowly, cloak drawn around your shoulders, and open the door into the morning rhythm of the castle. The corridor is busier than you imagined. Servants shuffle past in twos and threes, balancing buckets of water, armfuls of wood, trays laden with coarse loaves. Their steps are quick but quiet, their voices low, each person intent on their task. The air here smells of smoke, yeast, and damp stone. The torches burn brighter now, though their smoke curls thickly into the rafters, leaving your throat dry as you breathe it in. Household manuals from the era describe these early hours as a flurry of activity. Fires relit, animals fed, bread baked, floors swept, latrines emptied. It was the invisible scaffolding of life, rarely written about in detail because it was so constant. Watching it now, you realize the nobility's comforts depended entirely on this quiet choreography. Without it, the hall would remain cold, the tables bare, the chamber pots overflowing. One curious instruction preserved in a steward's handbook advised that servants should never be idle in the corridors, lest a passing lord suspect laziness. Even when waiting for tasks, they were to move, polish, sweep, or at least appear busy. You notice this truth now. No one stands still. Even a boy carrying only a single candlestick moves with exaggerated purpose, as though stillness itself might earn punishment. Experts continue to debate whether this routine was crushing or stabilizing. Some argue that endless labor left little time for joy, reducing lives to drudgery. Others note that the predictability of the tasks, the rhythm of dawn to dusk work, gave people a sense of order and belonging. As you watch a young woman laugh quietly while adjusting the load of wood on her shoulder, you see both: toil mixed with moments of humanity, hardship softened by brief connections. You descend a narrow stair, the stone cold beneath your boots, and emerge into the lower passage that leads to the kitchens. The sounds grow louder here, pots clanging, knives chopping, fires roaring. The air is dense with the smell of baking bread, thick and yeasty, enough to make your stomach stir even after last night's feast. Beneath it lingers the sharper scent of onions and herbs, already simmering in pots for the day's meals. A scullion rushes past with a dripping pail, water sloshing over the rim onto the flagstones. He mutters under his breath, barefoot despite the chill, his feet calloused from years of such labor. Behind him, another child sweeps ash from a hearth, her broom worn nearly to a nub. Neither spares you a glance, they are too focused, too practiced at weaving through crowded spaces without pause. The kitchen itself is alive. A cook stirs a vast pot of pottage, its contents bubbling sluggishly, sending up steam that fogs the air. Another kneads dough with steady, rhythmic motions, her arms dusted white with flour. A third sharpens knives, the rasp of steel against stone ringing sharp above the rest. It is a symphony of labor, each person moving in time with the others, no conductor needed because the rhythm is centuries old. One odd account from a visitor to a great castle Notes that cooks sometimes slept beside their hearths to save time in the morning. Their bodies smelled perpetually of smoke and grease, their hands scarred from burns, yet their presence was indispensable. Looking at the fire-streaked faces before you, you can imagine the truth of it. These men and women are bound to the flames as surely as guards to their watchtowers. You step back to let a tray of trenchers pass thick slabs of stale bread baked yesterday, now destined to serve as plates for the day's meal. The smell is heavy, sour, but reassuring. Soon they will soak up grease and broth, then be tossed to dogs or the poor. They are part of the same cycle you saw last night. Nothing wasted, everything serving a purpose, even when its life as food ends. The debate among historians about castle kitchens lingers in your mind. Were they centers of innovation, places where spices and imported goods transformed diets? Or were they mostly engines of monotony, turning out endless pots of the same grain-based stews? Standing here, you suspect the answer lies in scale. The Lord's table may see cinnamon and saffron, while the servants' bowls hold only peas and barley. Both emerge from the same fire, yet their destinies diverge. The heat presses against your face as you linger near the hearth, smoke stinging your eyes. You cough and step back, realizing how suffocating it must be to labor here all day. The cooks barely notice, their motions too ingrained to allow complaint. The air is thick with life, heavy but essential. Without it, the castle above would starve. A peculiar tidbit from old records mentions how castle kitchens sometimes doubled as sleeping quarters for dogs, even pigs, their warmth considered useful for keeping fires alive at night. You picture the animals curled among the rushes, snoring while embers glowed faintly nearby. Perhaps last night, while you shifted restlessly in your straw bed, a scullion dozed beside a pig in the kitchen, grateful for the heat of another living body. The smells cling to you as you step back into the corridor: smoke, bread, onions, sweat. They mingle with the damp chill of the stone, creating an atmosphere both nourishing and oppressive. You realize that to spend a night in a medieval castle is also to wake into this world, a world not of grandeur but of ceaseless work, smoke, filled air, and laboring bodies. Your stomach growls faintly, though you ate well. The smell of bread is too strong, too insistent. You imagine servants sneaking a crust when no one looks, risking rebuke for the chance to taste what they themselves produced. Hunger is always close, no matter how plentiful the stores. The corridors beyond grow brighter as daylight creeps through narrow slits in the walls. The night has ended, though the sun is not yet fully risen. The castle's heartbeat quickens boots on stairs, voices louder, fires blazing higher. The world of shadows and uneasy sleep gives way to the world of labor and expectation. You pull your cloak tighter, stepping aside as another pair of servants hurry past with buckets. The castle is fully awake now, its rhythm unrelenting. And as you watch the people move, you understand. A night here is not a pause between days, but a thread in the continuous tapestry of work, noise, and endurance. Sleep was only an interlude. The labor begins anew. The smell of fresh bread clings to you as you leave the kitchens behind. You follow the flow of servants deeper into the castle, where the passages open into a wide service court. Here, the energy is different. It is less hidden, less hushed, and more openly bustling. The day has not fully broken, yet the castle's outer world already stirs with preparation for the morning meal. You step into the courtyard and the chill rushes at you instantly, sharper than any draught inside. The open air tastes damp and metallic, carrying the scents of earth, manure, and smoke. A faint light grays the sky above, stars fading into the stubborn darkness of pre-dawn. The castle walls loom around you, their silhouettes jagged and immense, and for a moment you feel very small beneath their weight. Contemporary accounts remind us that mornings in castles were dominated by chores not glamorous but vital. Stables had to be mucked, wells drawn, livestock tended, and fires kindled for brewing ale or boiling laundry. Everything required hands, constant and unrelenting. You see it unfolding now. Boys leading horses from stalls, their breath misting in the cold, women scrubbing wooden tubs with steaming water, dogs snapping at each other over scraps. One peculiar note from a 15th century rollbook mentions that castle wells often doubled as gathering spots where gossip spread as quickly as water. As buckets creaked up and ropes groaned, tongues wagged with news of harvests, births, quarrels, and scandals. You catch the faint murmur of voices near the well now, women laughing softly even as their arms strain with wet ropes. Gossip, it seems, is as vital as water for sustaining life here. Scholars continue to question how orderly such spaces were. Were castle courtyards tightly regulated, each task supervised? Or were they semi-chaotic, with animals, servants, and tradesmen jostling together in noisy confusion? Looking at the scene before you, you suspect both. There is rhythm in the tasks, horses brushed, water hauled, but also chaos. A pig breaking loose, children darting after it, a dog barking madly as someone shouts in frustration. It is messy and alive, a reminder that castles were not just fortresses but farms, households, and villages condensed into stone. The smells are overwhelming. Fresh hay mingles with dung, smoke with yeast, wet earth with sweat. It is not pleasant, but it is grounding. Every scent tells you what sustains this world. Animals, food, fire, people. To modern senses it may seem crude, but to them it was the ordinary fabric of life. A boy brushes down a horse, its hide steaming in the cold air. The animal snorts, stamping impatiently, its muscles rippling under the brush. The boy whispers to it, his voice soothing despite his own trembling hands. You realize how much skill and patience was required from those lowest in rank. The great lord might boast of his stables, but it was children like this who kept the animals alive through winter nights. Another odd detail surfaces. Some castles kept dovecots, their flocks of pigeons providing meat, eggs, and fertilizer. The birds were jealously guarded, their theft punishable by law. You imagine the cooing from such a tower now, wings fluttering as dawn creeps nearer. Even the smallest creatures had roles to play in the rhythm of stone life. You watch a servant girl scrub a large wooden vat, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her skin raw from the chill. Steam curls from the water, fogging her face, but she works steadily, pausing only to brush hair from her eyes. Around her, others haul baskets of rushes, spreading them to cover mud. The ground itself is tended like a living floor, refreshed and disguised daily. The soundscape is its own kind of music, the clatter of buckets, the snort of animals, the chatter of voices rising and falling. The courtyard is alive in a way the great hall never was, less ceremonial, more vital. You feel as though you are witnessing the heartbeat of the castle, the part unseen by guests but essential to its survival. Historians still debate the exact role of women in these spaces. Some argue they were confined mostly to domestic labor indoors. Others point to records of women hauling water, brewing ale, tending animals, and even repairing walls. Watching the figures around you, skirts hitched against mud, arms straining with buckets, you sense that the truth lies in their sheer presence. They are everywhere, in every task, keeping the castle alive with work that went unnoticed in chronicles, but left fingerprints on every stone. A rooster crows suddenly, shrill and insistent, echoing against the walls. The sound is oddly triumphant, as though declaring victory over the night. The courtyard pauses briefly, men glance upward, children laugh, dogs bark louder, then the rhythm resumes, more urgent now. Dawn is close, and with it comes the expectation that the Lord's household will rise. Everything must be in place. Fires blazing, water hauled, animals fed, tables prepared. The invisible labor must be invisible no longer. It must manifest as seamless comfort for those who command. One rare and quirky anecdote describes how some lords, rising early, would test the readiness of their household by wandering the corridors to see if fires were lit and bread fresh. Servants caught unprepared risked punishment. You glance around the bustling courtyard and realize how much of this activity is driven not only by necessity but by fear. Perfection is demanded daily, and the margin for error is slim. The cold bites harder as you draw your cloak tighter, yet the servants continue with bare arms, bare feet, faces ruddy from frost. You wonder how they endure it. Perhaps their bodies adapted, or perhaps they simply had no choice. To survive here is not about comfort, but about persistence. The sky lightens further, streaks of pale blue breaking through the black. The castle walls catch the first hint of dawn, their surfaces turning from shadow to stone. The courtyard hums louder now, urgency quickening with every passing minute. Fires blaze higher, buckets clatter faster, animals shift restlessly. The day has arrived, whether the sun admits it or not. You step back toward the passage, glancing once more at the scene. The great hall may dazzle, the bedchamber may promise rest, but this, the smoky, noisy, messy courtyard, is the true pulse of castle life. To spend a night here is to wake, not to silence but to labor, to the ceaseless work of unseen hands. As you return to the corridor, the sounds follow you, echoing off stone. The crow of the rooster, the clatter of buckets, the murmur of gossip by the well. They are the chorus that greets every dawn in this world. And you realize that in a castle without gas or electricity, morning is not a gentle transition. It is an eruption, a demand, a relentless call to labor that will not rest until night returns. The corridor swallows you again, muffling the courtyard's clatter, but the smell of smoke and baking bread clings to your cloak. You climb a narrow spiral stair, each step worn hollow in the middle from centuries of feet, and emerge into the great hall once more. The transformation is startling. Where last night the room glowed with feasting and music, now it smells faintly of stale ale and grease. The rushes on the floor are dark with scraps and bones, and the torches burn dimly as if reluctant to relight the revelry. Yet even here, servants are already at work. Two women sweep with bundles of twigs, pushing bones and crusts into piles. A boy gathers trenchers into a basket, their surfaces soggy with grease. A dog lingers near the hearth, gnawing on a bone, until one of the women swats it away with a sharp word. The hearth itself smoulders faintly, ashes grey, heat almost gone. The hall feels hung over, caught between the memory of last night's noise and the expectation of today's order. Medieval accounts make clear that this was the rhythm of great halls, feast and spectacle by night, chores and silence by morning. The very space that dazzled visitors also demanded endless labor to reset. To leave it unclean would be to invite rot, vermin, and dishonor. You watch now as fresh rushes, laced with herbs, are scattered to cover the stains. The smell of rosemary and lavender rises, sharp and clean, fighting to mask the sourness of spilled ale. One curious note from Chronicles describes how poor people sometimes collected used rushes after they were discarded, bringing them home as bedding or fuel. Even refuse from the Lord's Hall carried value. You picture the piles being carted away later, perhaps scavenged by eager hands at the castle gate. Nothing here, not even dirt, is truly wasted. Experts disagree on how central the Great Hall remained by the later Middle Ages. Some argue that lords withdrew into private chambers, leaving the hall for retainers and servants. Others insist it remained the symbolic heart of the household, even if its daily use shifted. Standing here now, you feel its importance. The hall is not just a room, it is a stage, a memory, and a promise. Even empty, it radiates authority. The smells tell you last night lingers. Roasted meat, sour ale, smoke. They mingle with the fresher scents of herbs and bread, drifting faintly from the kitchens below. It is both foul and familiar, like the morning after any revelry. Your stomach tightens, half from hunger, half from queasiness at the mingled odours. A servant kneels near the hearth, scraping ash into a bucket. The sound grates across stone, harsh in the quiet. Another climbs a stool to relight a torch, the spark flashing briefly before the flame catches. Slowly, light spreads, though the hall feels less alive without laughter to fill it. You realize the grandeur of this space depends entirely on bodies and voices. Without them, it is just cold stone. One unusual tradition recorded in feast accounts is the wassail, a communal bowl of spiced drink carried around the hall at dawn in the days after Christmas. Servants and nobles alike sipped from it, binding the household in shared ritual. No such bowl appears this morning, but you can imagine the steam of hot ale, the tang of spices, the murmurs of voices weaving unity before dispersing to daily duties. The benches are stacked against the walls now, clearing the center of the hall. The emptiness makes the space seem larger, echoing with each footstep. The dais at the far end sits silent, its chairs empty, but even without occupants it radiates hierarchy. You imagine the Lord still sleeping in his chamber, unaware of the work unfolding to restore his hall to perfection. A strange hush lingers despite the movement. The servants speak little, their motions efficient, their voices kept low. Perhaps they fear waking others, or perhaps habit has trained them to let the hall itself command the sound. Their silence makes you more aware of your own breath, your own presence, as though you are intruding on sacred ground. From above, faint light filters through narrow windows, casting long stripes across the stone floor. Dust dances in the beams, glittering briefly before vanishing into shadow. You realize how different light feels here. Not constant, not guaranteed, but fleeting, fragile, dependent on fire or Sunday. Each glow becomes precious, and each shadow heavy. Scholars often ask whether medieval mornings were quieter or noisier than ours. Some argue that the lack of machines made them peaceful, filled only with natural sounds. Others insist they were louder, with animals, labor, and voices echoing through stone. Listening now, you lean toward the latter. The absence of humming wires does not mean silence. It means every scrape, every murmur, every bark feels magnified. A boy slips on the rushes, spilling bones from his basket. He curses under his breath, then blushes as an older servant scolds him sharply. The bones clatter against stone, the sound echoing far too loudly for such a small mishap. You see how even small moments carry weight here, each mistake recorded in sound and memory. The hearth flares as fresh logs are placed, their crackle filling the void. The hall warms slightly, though drafts still snake through the gaps in doors and windows. You draw your cloak tighter, understanding that no amount of fire truly conquers stone. Warmth here is always partial, never certain. You stand in the middle of the space, letting the hall breathe around you. Its emptiness is as telling as its fullness. By night it displayed abundance. By morning, it reveals the effort required to sustain that illusion. To spend a night in a medieval castle is to wake into this truth, that grandeur is built on labor, silence, and the constant cycle of renewal. A servant sprinkles more herbs on the floor, and the sharp scent rises again, fresh and green. The boy with the basket gathers bones once more, his face set in determination. The dog returns, sniffing hopefully, but is chased away again. Slowly, the hall transforms from aftermath to readiness. Soon it will host another day of life, another performance of order and authority. You glance once more at the dais, then turn toward the stair. The hall fades behind you, its silence heavy, its labor ongoing. You carry its smell with you: smoke, herbs, grease, bread, the lingering memory of a place that never truly rests. You leave the hall behind and ascend another narrow stair, the stone spiraling upward in tight, dizzying curves. The air grows colder with each step, the torch you carry sputtering as drafts coil down from higher passages. At last, you emerge onto the battlements, and the world outside stretches vast before you. The sky has shifted from black to a bruised grey. Clouds hang low and heavy, tinged faintly with pink where the sun strains to rise. The fields and woods beyond the walls lie hushed, frost glimmering faintly on their surfaces. Smoke rises from a few distant cottages, thin and pale, carrying the scent of peat or wood into the chill. From here the castle seems both a sanctuary and a cage, secure against the world beyond, yet cut off from it by stone and height. Guards pace along the wall, their boots crunching on frost, their breath steaming in the air. One pauses to adjust the strap of his helm, another leans briefly against a merlon, scanning the horizon with weary eyes. They nod to you as you pass, but their focus quickly returns outward. To them, the landscape is not beauty but duty. Every movement in the dark tree line, every flicker of smoke, a possible threat. Records from garrisons remind us how monotonous these watches could be. Hour after hour of staring into the same darkness, punctuated only by false alarms or rare disturbances. Chroniclers describe men stamping their feet, muttering prayers, or whispering to each other just to stay awake. You hear such mutters now, half drowned by the wind, fragments of conversation shared between soldiers desperate to fill the silence. One curious practice noted in accounts is that guards sometimes carried small wooden clappers, striking them together at intervals to prove they were awake. It was both reassurance and reprimand comfort for those inside the walls, and pressure for those tasked with vigilance. Tonight, no clappers echo, but the rhythm of boots and voices serves the same purpose. Scholars remain divided on how effective such defences were. Some argue that the mere sight of armed men atop high walls deterred most raiders. Others suggest that complacency and fatigue left castles vulnerable, especially in long winters when hunger gnawed at everyone's will. Looking at the guards now, shifting uneasily in the cold, you understand both views. Their presence is formidable, yet their humanity is visible in every yawn and shiver. The wind bites at your cheeks, raw and sharp. It smells of frost, smoke, and faintly of the stables below. You pull your cloak tighter, though the cold still snakes under it. Imagine standing here for hours, armor digging into your shoulders, wind clawing at your skin. Vigilance is not just duty, it is endurance. The stone beneath your boots is slick with frost, its surface worn smooth by centuries of pacing. You move carefully, feeling the edge of the wall drop away beside you. Beyond it, the moat gleams faintly, a dark ribbon threading around the castle's base. You imagine it in summer, buzzing with insects, or in siege, fouled with waste and bodies. For now it is quiet, its surface frozen thinly, mirroring the grey sky. A horn sounds faintly from a nearby tower, low, brief, not alarm but signal. One guard answers with a shout, his voice carrying across the battlements. The exchange is routine, yet it jolts you with its suddenness. Communication here is as fragile as light. It relies on lungs, on sound, on vigilance. One missed call, and the castle could fall silent at the wrong moment. An odd superstition recorded in folklore suggested that owls perched on battlements were omens sometimes of death, sometimes of wisdom, depending on who interpreted the sign. You glance at the tower's edge, and indeed see a dark shape hunched there. Its head swivels silently, its eyes catching the faint light. It makes no sound, but its presence is uncanny, a living shadow against the stone. The guards ignore it, perhaps too used to its visits to assign it meaning. But for you, the sight lingers. The bird seems part of the castle itself, as though the walls have sprouted wings to keep watch. You shiver, though not entirely from cold. The sounds of dawn grow stronger below. Roosters crowing again, servants calling, the clatter of buckets and hooves. Yet up here, the world feels separate, suspended. The guards move in slow rhythm, the owl shifts its head, and the frost thickens as the sky brightens. The castle lives on two levels at once, earthly bustle below, grim vigilance above. You pause at a crenel, leaning out slightly. The countryside stretches wider now, faint outlines of fields, hedges, and distant forests emerging as light grows. You realize how much of medieval life was lived within sight of such walls, how the landscape itself was measured by the stone that enclosed it. To be inside the castle was safety, to be beyond was vulnerability. And yet the guards remind you that safety was always provisional, always conditional on their weary eyes and stiff bodies enduring the long hours. Another detail comes to mind. Some castles built small shelters or huts along the battlements where guards could huddle against the cold. Tonight, you see no such refuge, only cloaks pulled tight and hands rubbed raw. You wonder how many fell ill from such nights. Lungs weakened, bones stiffened, their suffering unnoticed in chronicles that glorified battles but ignored the weariness of watchmen. The horn sounds again, closer this time, marking the change of watch. Relief arrives, men stamping their feet, rubbing their arms, ready to leave the wall for a few hours of rest. Their replacements climb the stair, faces pale in the grey light, eyes heavy but resigned. The cycle turns again, unbroken. As you watch the exchange, you realize the castle never truly sleeps. It only shifts its weight, passing vigilance from one body to another, its heartbeat steady through endless nights. To spend a night here is to learn this truth. Safety is not stone alone, but the exhaustion of men who pace its walls. The owl lifts suddenly, wings wide, silent as it glides into the fading night. The guards barely glance. For them, the night is ending. But for you, the memory of it remains the cold, the vigilance, the fragile line between safety and silence. You turn back toward the stair, the grey light deepening into the pale promise of dawn. Below, the castle stirs louder. Above, the watch continues. And between them you walk, carrying the echo of boots and wings in your ears. The spiral stair swallows you once again, carrying you down from the icy battlements into the warmer belly of the castle. Your torch crackles as you descend, its flame wavering each time the wind sneaks through narrow arrow slits. When you emerge into a lower corridor, the smell hits you first. Sharp, acrid, unmistakable. You are approaching the latrine tower, the garderobe. The passage narrows, and a draught of foul air wafts up, mingling with the chill. You step into a small stone chamber jutting out from the castle wall, perched precariously above the moat. A narrow wooden seat spans a hole in the floor, dark and ominous. Beneath it, through the shaft, lies the unseen pit where waste collects. The smell rises in thick waves, enough to sting your eyes and turn your stomach. Medieval records describe garderobes as both essential and despised. They were practical marvels, funneling waste away from chambers. Yet they stank so powerfully that some lords hung herbs or tapestries nearby in a futile attempt to mask the odour. You look at the narrow slit of a window cut beside the seat, meant to let air escape, but tonight it only channels the wind and worsens the draught. One peculiar detail from household accounts is that garderobes sometimes doubled as storage for clothing or armour, the ammonia in the air believed to ward off fleas and moths. The thought makes you grimace. Imagine pulling on a cloak that has hung for weeks in this stench. Yet necessity trumped sensibility, and perhaps it worked. In its own rank way, the chamber became both latrine and wardrobe. Historians disagree on how often these shafts were cleaned. Some claim servants regularly shoveled waste from cesspits, hauling it away to spread as fertilizer on fields. Others argue that many pits were left until they overflowed, polluting the moat and sickening those nearby. Standing here, breathing the pungent air, you suspect both may be true, depending on wealth, season, and desperation. The sounds are as vivid as the smells. Water drips faintly from the shaft below, perhaps from rain or from the moat into which the waste empties. The wind moans through the narrow slit, whistling against stone edges. The wood creaks softly beneath your boots, as though reminding you that centuries of use have left it weary. You imagine servants scrubbing here by day, muttering curses as they dumped buckets, the air clinging to their hair and clothes long after they left. You sit tentatively on the wooden plank, the draught icy against your skin. The experience is startlingly raw. The grandeur of the hall, the dignity of the chapel, even the uneasy comfort of the bedchamber all collapse into this. The same human needs, unchanged across rank or wealth. The lord may sit on a slightly sturdier seat, with a curtain drawn for privacy, but the act is identical. Stone does not discriminate when it comes to necessity. A strange superstition recorded in folklore claimed that spirits or demons might climb the shafts at night to attack sleepers. People muttered prayers before using the garderobe, asking for protection not just from disease but from the unseen. You glance warily into the dark hole beneath you and can almost believe anything could rise from that blackness, borne on the stench. The cold cuts sharper here, drawn in through the shaft like a funnel. Your skin prickles, your breath fogs. You shiver despite your cloak, eager to retreat. The chamber feels exposed, vulnerable, as though the walls themselves are thinner. You realize how frightening this space could be at night, when torches burned low and the wind howled louder, each shadow threatening to swallow you whole. Researchers still argue whether garderobes were private or communal in practice. Some suggest nobles had their own attached to chambers, while servants and soldiers shared larger shafts. Others note that even lords often used the same towers as their household, privacy being relative in stone life. Standing here, surrounded by stench and draughts, you suspect that even the wealthiest could not escape the reality of shared discomfort. The smell grows heavier as you linger, pressing into your nose and mouth until it feels like you are tasting it. You gag softly and step away from the seat, pressing closer to the slit of a window. Cold air rushes in, cleaner but still tainted. You draw a long breath, grateful, even as the wind claws at your face. One odd but practical fact: castle garderobes were sometimes targeted during sieges. Attackers could climb the shafts, bypassing walls, slipping silently into chambers. The very feature meant to expel filth became a secret entrance. You imagine the terror of waking to find enemies rising from the latrine, swords in hand, the stink of waste clinging to them like armor. The thought sends a shiver deeper than the draught. The torch sputters, its smoke caught in the wind. Shadows leap across the walls, distorting the wooden seat into monstrous shapes. You step back toward the door, eager to leave. The garderobe has reminded you more than any chamber so far that a night in a castle is not romance but reality. Cold, stench, vulnerability. Stone cannot polish away the most human truths. You pull the door closed behind you, the air immediately cleaner though still carrying a ghost of the smell. The corridor feels warmer, safer, simply by contrast. You breathe deeply, grateful, and realize that the garderobe is its own kind of lesson. To spend a night in a medieval castle is to encounter both majesty and muck, woven together inseparably. You leave the garderobe behind with relief, though the stench clings faintly to your cloak as if unwilling to let you go. The corridor beyond feels fresh by comparison, though the air is still cool and heavy with damp. You ascend another stair, the torch crackling as it struggles against the draughts, and soon you find yourself climbing higher than before. The stair narrows until your shoulders brush the walls, and then it opens abruptly into a chamber near the top of one of the towers. The space is stark. Unlike the great hall or the chapel, there are no tapestries, no carved chairs, no finery. Instead, rough wooden pallets line the walls, straw spilling onto the stone floor. A single brazier glows faintly at the center, its embers casting just enough light to show weary faces. This is the soldiers' dormitory, the place where the garrison sleeps between watches. The smell greets you first: sweat, damp wool, and smoke layered thickly in the air. It is the scent of bodies packed close, of cloaks and boots never fully dry, of straw too long unturned. Your nose wrinkles. But the men within seem oblivious. They are too exhausted to notice. Some lie sprawled on pallets, mouths open, snoring loudly. Others curl under cloaks, knees drawn to chests, breaths shallow but steady. A few still sit upright, rubbing their eyes, waiting for the horn that will summon them back to the walls. Medieval records often describe such arrangements. Soldiers sleeping in shared quarters, sometimes dozens to a room. Privacy was non-existent, and warmth came from proximity. The brazier offered little comfort, its heat swallowed quickly by stone. Here, as in the hall, survival was collective. one body's warmth bled into another's. One curious note from Chronicles mentions how soldiers often shared not only straw pallets but also blankets, borrowing heat wherever possible. To them, it was not intimacy but necessity. You glance at two men curled together against the wall, their cloaks overlapping, and realize how little choice they had in the matter. Cold was the true enemy, and companionship the only shield. Historians still debate how much rest these men truly found. Some argue that exhaustion made sleep inevitable, no matter the discomfort. Others insist that noise, pests, and drafts left soldiers perpetually weary, their bodies never fully restored. Listening now to the chorus of snores, coughs, and shifting straw, you suspect both views hold truth. Sleep came, but it was never gentle. The brazier pops softly, sending sparks upward. The smoke drifts toward the narrow slits cut into the wall, but most of it lingers, stinging your eyes and throat. You cough quietly, but no one stirs. They are too deep in the fog of fatigue, too used to breathing smoke as part of life. You wonder how many lungs gave way to such air, weakened long before their time. The straw pallets rustle as men shift in their sleep. The sound is dry, brittle, constant, like whispers overlapping. You catch glimpses of lice crawling through seams, their presence so ordinary that no one bothers to swat them. Insects thrive here just as much as men, their tiny bodies feeding on blood as soldiers dream of warmth. One odd superstition recorded among garrisons held that dreams in such quarters foretold battles. A man who dreamed of falling might die in a siege. A man who dreamed of fire might see the castle burn. You glance at a soldier twitching violently in his sleep, his lips murmuring words you cannot hear, and you wonder what omen he carries into the dark. The draught cuts sharper near the arrow slits. You step closer, peering out into the grey of early dawn. The countryside stretches silent, but you know these men keep their bodies ready in case silence breaks. Their rest is never absolute. Even in sleep, they remain soldiers, summoned at any moment by horn or shout. You step back, hearing another sound, the rasp of dice rolling on wood. In a corner, two men huddle under a cloak, whispering as they play, careful not to wake their comrades. Gambling was as constant a companion to soldiers as fatigue. Some records even complain of guards wagering away pay before it was earned. The small clatter of dice now feels oddly soothing, a reminder that life here, though hard, was still threaded with moments of escape. Scholars question how discipline and disorder balanced in such spaces. Some point to strict codes that punished gambling, drinking, or fighting. Others note that camaraderie and vice often blurred, tolerated so long as duties were met. Watching the dice roll across wood, you suspect discipline bent often in the face of boredom and cold. The brazier sputters again, and a soldier rises, tossing in another stick of wood before collapsing back onto his pallet. The glow brightens briefly, then fades to the same dull red. Nothing here is meant to last. Not warmth, not comfort, not rest. All is temporary, snatched in fragments before the cycle turns again. You imagine the horn sounding now, how quickly these men would stir, rubbing eyes, pulling on cloaks, stamping feet to drive warmth back into their limbs. Sleep would vanish, replaced by duty. Their lives are measured not by hours of rest, but by rotations of watch and wake, endlessly repeated until their bodies give out. The air grows heavier the longer you linger, the smoke thick, the smell oppressive. You realize that to spend a night in a castle is also to share this, the restless, crowded, smoky world of soldiers whose comfort is as brittle as straw. Their presence keeps the walls safe, but their lives are spent in quiet discomfort few remember. You turn back toward the stair, the sound of snores and dice fading behind you. The dormitory remains as you leave it, dim, smoky, weary, alive. Another corner of the castle's truth revealed where vigilance sleeps uneasily, and the price of safety is measured in restless dreams. You descend again, the stair twisting endlessly downward, until you find yourself in a part of the castle you have not yet explored, the storage vaults. The air is cooler here, heavier, carrying the earthy scent of grain and the faint tang of iron. Your torchlight stretches down long rows of barrels, sacks, and crates, each shadowed corner hiding more supplies. This is the castle's belly, its hoard against hunger and siege, the silent companion to every feast in the hall above. The first thing you notice is the stillness. Unlike the kitchens or dormitories, the storerooms do not hum with voices. Only your footsteps echo softly, and the faint scurrying of a rat breaks the silence now and then. Yet the place feels alive in its own way, alive with potential, with the weight of sustenance that will keep the castle breathing through winter. Chroniclers tell us that storage was a constant concern. Castles were judged not only by their walls, but by their granaries. A well-stocked vault could mean survival in times of famine or siege, while an empty one spelled disaster. You run your hand over a sack of barley, the coarse weave rough beneath your fingers, and imagine how carefully these grains were measured, counted, guarded. An odd practice recorded in manorial accounts describes how some castles kept their grain in sealed bins, plastered with clay to keep out pests. Breaking the seal was an event, sometimes even blessed by a priest, for once the stores were opened, scarcity loomed. You picture such rituals here, the hush of servants as clay cracked, the knowledge that winter had become lean. Historians continue to debate whether food storage was effective in keeping pests away. Some argue that castles suffered terribly from rats and insects, their stores dwindling faster than intended. Others suggest that careful planning and cats prowling the vaults kept damage minimal. A flicker of movement catches your eye, and you see two glowing eyes staring back from the shadows. A cat crouches there, tail flicking, watching a rat that dares too close to a sack of oats. The predator and the pest, both woven into the cycle of survival. The air is dense with smells: dried peas, smoked fish, ale seeping faintly from barrels, salt clinging to the air. Each scent is a story. Smoked fish tells of rivers netted in summer, now stretched into winter meals. Salt speaks of trade, of journeys to distant coasts to fetch this precious mineral. Ale barrels whisper of brewing days in the courtyard, the froth of yeast and grain turned into the liquid staple of every meal. One curious tidbit preserved in letters notes that ale was consumed in astonishing quantities, sometimes a gallon a day per person, not because they sought drunkenness, but because water was often unsafe. Even children drank weak ale, their cups filled from the same barrels that sit before you now. You imagine the servants dipping pitchers at dawn, carrying them upstairs, the taste both nourishing and monotonous. The torchlight glimmers on iron rings, holding barrels together. The shadows seem to bend, giving the vault a cavernous feel. You pass racks of cheese wheels, their rinds thick and waxy, exuding a pungent odor. Meat hangs from hooks, dried into dark slabs that look more like wood than food. To modern eyes, this might seem unappetizing, but here it is, treasure calories preserved against time, protection against hunger's edge. Researchers are still uncertain how balanced diets were in such castles. Some argue that nobility ate lavishly from these stores, with spices and imported goods brightening meals. Others point out that during long winters, even lords dined on endless pottage and bread. Walking between these barrels and sacks, you sense the monotony as well as the abundance. Variety is rare, survival steady but dull. The silence presses on you. Your footsteps echo like drumbeats, too loud for comfort. You pause, listening. Somewhere, a rat squeaks. The cat leaps silently, claws clicking briefly on stone, and the squeak ends. The vault returns to quiet. You realize that this stillness is deceptive. The storeroom is not lifeless, but contested ground between humans and pests, between plenty and scarcity, between present comfort and future fear. You pass a rack of pickled vegetables, their jars cloudy with brine. The smell is sharp, vinegar cutting through the air. Pickling was as vital as salting, another way to trap summer's bounty in glass and clay. The jars gleam dully in the light, tiny worlds preserved in liquid, waiting for hungry mouths. A peculiar superstition noted in folklore claimed that spoiled stores were signs of divine displeasure. If meat rotted too quickly or grain molded despite careful sealing, some saw it as punishment for sin. You picture the anxiety of a steward discovering a barrel gone foul, his heart sinking not just from the waste but from the fear of what it meant. The walls here are thick, their stones cool to the touch. You run your hand across them and feel the damp that seeps in. These vaults may be protection, but they are not perfect. Moisture is always an enemy, creeping into sacks, souring grain, rusting iron hoops. Even the castle's belly suffers the quiet gnaw of time. The torch sputters, its smoke curling upward to vanish into shadow. You feel the weight of the place pressing in the weight of food, of responsibility, of survival. For all the glamour of feasts above, this is the true feast. Barrels, sacks, and racks, waiting patiently in the dark. As you turn back toward the stair, you glance once more at the cat, now licking its paw calmly beside the slain rat. The balance holds, for now, but the lesson lingers. To spend a night in a medieval castle is also to wake into its vaults, to see that behind the illusions of abundance lies the constant struggle to preserve, ration, and endure. You climb from the vault slowly, leaving behind the scent of salt and barley, the silence of barrels and sacks. The stair curves upward again, this time leading not to soldiers' dormitories or kitchens, but to a quieter, more hallowed space. When you step through the next archway, the atmosphere changes at once. Here, the air carries the faint sweetness of beeswax candles, the dry, dusty perfume of old parchment, and a hush that feels deliberate. You have entered the chapel. It is a small chamber compared to the great hall, yet its presence is immense. Narrow windows pierce the thick stone, their glass coloured faintly with blues and reds, though the light of dawn is too pale to make them glow. A stone altar sits at the far end, simple but solemn, its surface draped with linen. A carved crucifix hangs above, the figure worn smooth by centuries of eyes and prayers. The torch in your hand feels intrusive here, so you lower it, letting the shadows deepen around the gentle flicker of a single candle left burning near the altar. Contemporary accounts remind us that every castle of note had such a chapel, for no household dared exist without one. Faith threaded through every aspect of life, and stone without prayer was considered hollow. The chapel was where births, marriages, deaths, and daily rhythms were sanctified. Even before feasts or hunts, lords might pause here to cross themselves, seeking divine favour. One curious detail from records is that relics were sometimes housed in these chapels, fragments of bone, cloth, or wood believed to carry holy power. Some were genuine, others dubious, but all were revered. You imagine a casket once placed on this altar, its contents drawing pilgrims or guests eager to touch the sacred. The room itself would have pulsed with awe, even if the relic was little more than splintered wood. Researchers remain divided over how much true devotion guided these rituals and how much was politics. Some argue that lords used chapels as displays of piety to bolster authority, while others insist belief was genuine, woven deeply into daily life. Looking at the crucifix above the altar, you feel both possibilities. The figure is weathered, but the faith it represented was sharp enough to cut across centuries. The smell of beeswax soothes you after the acrid stench of the garderobe and the musty vaults. Its sweetness mingles with the faint odour of incense, burned perhaps the day before. The air is warmer here too, held by thick walls and softened by hanging cloth. For a moment you feel sheltered, as though the stone itself is gentler in this space. You sit on a rough wooden bench, its surface worn smooth by countless bodies. The silence around you is profound, broken only by the drip of water somewhere in the walls and the faint rustle of your cloak. The weight of the castle seems less oppressive here, softened by prayer and ritual. An odd superstition recorded in some chronicles claims that chapels protected not only souls but bodies. People believed that sleeping in such spaces kept demons away. Some guards even dozed here during stormy nights, convinced the sanctity would shield them. You wonder how many whispered confessions were made in desperation, not faith men praying simply to make it through the cold. The candlelight shimmers against the walls, casting long shadows that bend across the altar. You imagine the chaplain at dawn, stepping softly, chanting in Latin, his voice rising and falling in echo. The congregation might be few, perhaps, the Lord's family, perhaps only a handful of servants, but the ritual marked time, as surely as the crow of roosters. Historians still discuss how literate or educated these chaplains were. Some were scholars, fluent in scripture and letters, guiding not only faith but also records of the household. Others were barely more than functionaries, repeating prayers by rote, their authority thin. You wonder which kind presided here, whether his sermons stirred hearts or merely filled silences. The benches creak faintly as you shift. The space feels timeless, set apart from the grime of kitchens and the vigilance of battlements. And yet even here, the same cold seeps through the stone. You draw your cloak tighter, realizing that even prayer could not banish drafts. Faith was warmth of spirit, not body. Another curious detail. Some chapels doubled as burial places for lords, their tombs resting beneath the very floors where prayers continued. The living and the dead shared the same sacred air, a constant reminder that stone life was temporary, eternity elsewhere. You look down at the worn flagstones and wonder whose bones might lie beneath your feet. The faint light from the windows shifts as dawn strengthens outside. For the first time, color stirs in the glass, reds deepening, blues softening, a trickle of brightness that transforms the grey. The figures painted there, saints, angels, symbols, glow faintly now, as though waking with the castle itself. The candle gutters, its flame leaning in the draught. You lean closer to steady it, instinctively protecting the fragile light. In that moment, you understand the chapel's place. It is not a grand hall of noise, nor a filthy garderobe of necessity. It is a fragile flame in the darkness, kept alive not by stone but by ritual, belief, and the stubborn hope of people who endured nights like the one you have just lived. You rise from the bench slowly, reluctant to leave the calm. The world outside will be noisy, smoky, cold. But you know now that to spend a night in a medieval castle is also to pass through this space of stillness, where survival was measured not just in bread and fire but in whispered prayers, flickering candles, and the fragile belief that someone, somewhere, was listening. You step quietly out of the chapel, carrying with you the faint sweetness of beeswax and incense, and the hush of stone sanctity. But almost at once the air changes. The moment you descend another passage, the smell of parchment and ink replaces that of candle smoke. You have wandered into the castle's treasury and records chamber, the space where coin, charters, and documents were kept under lock and key. The room is not grand, though its contents are priceless. Wooden chests bound with iron sit pushed against the walls, each secured with heavy locks. Shelves sag under the weight of rolls of parchment, their edges curled and darkened by time. A writing desk stands near a narrow slit of a window, its surface littered with quills, ink pots, and half-scraped parchments. The faint smell of ink mingles with the must of vellum, giving the space its own peculiar perfume, sharp, dry, intellectual. Medieval records tell us that the steward or the clerk was often the busiest man in a castle, for he carried the household's memory in ink and wax. He tracked rents, supplies, wages, debts, and privileges. Without his careful strokes, the lord's wealth might vanish like smoke. You picture him bent here in the dim light, lips pursed, eyes straining as he tallied numbers long into the night. One curious tidbit from accounts is that ink was often mixed with odd ingredients: soot, wine, even gallnuts from oak trees. The recipe changed from place to place, and a careless mixture could fade too quickly. You imagine the clerk cursing softly when a line blurred, scraping the parchment clean with a knife and beginning again. Scholars debate how secure these treasuries truly were. Some argue that their locks and guards made them nearly impregnable. Others point to chronicles of theft, where servants or even lords themselves dipped into stores when times grew desperate. Looking at the iron-bound chests now, you wonder how much of their contents were ever truly safe, and how much was always slipping quietly away. The light in the chamber is poor. The window slit allows only the faintest thread of dawn, and the torch in your hand casts more smoke than brightness. You lean closer to a shelf and see the thick dust gathered on some rolls. Others, though, are fresh, their seals still shining red with wax. The impression of a signet ring stands out clearly, authority pressed into wax to make words binding. The weight of law in this world was not paper but wax and seal. A peculiar superstition clung to seals themselves. Some believed that breaking one without permission invited curses. Whether divine wrath or worldly punishment, the seal carried power far beyond the words it guarded. You brush your finger near one, careful not to touch, and feel the pull of that fear even now. The chamber is quiet, but it is not silent. From somewhere above, footsteps echo faintly. Below, you hear the muffled clang of pots in kitchens. This room is both central and hidden, tucked within the castle's body, yet connected to every part of its rhythm. The smell of wax and ink thickens as you linger. You picture the steward dipping his quill, scratching long lines, pausing to sand the ink dry, then rolling the parchment tight and pressing it with seal. Each action was slow, deliberate, binding. Here, wealth and memory became tangible, stored in chests and scrolls rather than stone. Historians still argue whether lords themselves cared for these records, or whether they left it all to clerks. Some claim lords reviewed every charter, every tally. Others suggest they cared only for the results, never the details. Looking at the dim desk, the ink-stained cloth, you suspect the truth leaned toward the clerks, unsung men whose hands shaped the fortunes of castles while their names vanished from history. You glance at one chest and notice scratches along its edge, as though pried at long ago. Was it an attempted theft, or simply the mark of age? The iron looks strong, but you know metal yields to persistence, as surely as stone yields to time. Even wealth locked in chests is never entirely safe. One unusual detail survives in chronicles. Mice sometimes gnawed through parchment rolls, chewing at ink, stained edges, records of land and law reduced to nests of shredded vellum. The thought is sobering, so much power and planning undone by tiny teeth in the night. You hear faint scurrying now and smile grimly. The castle's memory is only as strong as its defenses against rats. The air is dry enough to parch your throat. You imagine the clerk sipping weak ale between tallies, wetting his lips as he whispered numbers. The candle at his desk would gutter low, smoke curling into the chamber, and still he would scratch on, his labour invisible but vital. Another debate among historians asks whether these treasuries were ever truly private. Some argue only the steward and lord entered. Others note that trusted servants or guards often passed through, carrying messages or counting coin. Looking at the scuffed floor, you think of how many boots crossed here, how many eyes glimpsed wealth, how temptation always lingered nearby. The torch sputters, smoke clouding your eyes. You set it in an iron sconce and sit briefly on a stool by the desk. The wood creaks beneath you, its surface scarred with knife marks from scraping parchment clean. You run your fingers over the grooves and feel the ghost of endless tallies. A faint draught brushes your cheek, carrying the smell of parchment and wax. It feels oddly soothing after the acrid garderobe and smoky dormitory. Yet you know this chamber, too, is part of the castle's night. To spend a night here is to know that survival was not only bread, fire, and vigilance. It was also record, tally, and seal the unseen ink that bound the household together. You rise again, reclaiming the torch. The chests sit silent, the scrolls waiting, the inkpots dry. The chamber does not need you. It will wait for the next hand, the next tally, the next seal pressed into wax. You step back into the corridor, the hush of parchment lingering like a whisper in your ear. You leave the treasury and its quiet scratch of quills behind, your ears still echoing with phantom tallies. The torchlight guides you deeper into the twisting arteries of the castle until the air grows warmer, richer, carrying with it the unmistakable perfume of roasting meat. You follow the scent down a sloping corridor, past heavy doors banded with iron, until you step into a cavernous chamber, the kitchens. The transformation is immediate. Here, the silence of parchment and wax is replaced by chaos, organized chaos, but chaos nonetheless. Fires roar in broad stone hearths, their smoke struggling to escape through high, blackened vents. Pots as wide as barrels bubble with pottage, hissing and spitting as fat rises to the surface. Knives flash in the dim light, cleaving through sides of pork and mounds of onions. Voices overlap in a low, steady murmur, rising now and again to shouts when a scullion drops a dish or a dog snaps at a scrap. Household records tell us that castle kitchens were never still. From before dawn until long after dark, they laboured to keep the hall above supplied. Even now, though breakfast is still distant, the work hums, bread baking, meat turning, herbs chopped by quick fingers. Without this hidden furnace, the grandeur of the great hall would collapse in a single day. One curious note from a surviving cook's manual describes how spices were ground with pestles so large they required 2 hands to lift. Cinnamon, cloves, pepper, costly treasures traded from far coasts were crushed here to transform simple grains and meat into delicacies for the lord. You glance at a mortar in the corner, its surface dark with residue, and imagine the fragrance once rising from its depths. Historians still debate how common these spices truly were. Some argue that only the wealthiest castles enjoyed regular access to saffron or ginger. Others suggest trade networks brought them more often than we assume, their taste prized enough to justify staggering costs. Watching a cook sprinkle something from a small pouch into a pot, you realize how even a pinch could shift a meal from ordinary to extraordinary. The air is dense, almost suffocating. Smoke clings to the rafters, while steam rolls thick from boiling pots. Sweat beads on every brow. A cook wipes his forehead with his sleeve, smearing flour into grease, then plunges his hands back into dough. Another coughs, the sound rough, but continues to stir. The work cannot pause, not for discomfort, not for illness, not for fatigue. The sounds here are relentless. Knives against boards, ladles clanging, dogs growling underfoot. The sizzle of meat over flame mingles with the slap of dough on tables. It is music of necessity, without conductor, without pause. Every servant knows his place, every movement practiced into habit. A peculiar tidbit from Chronicles notes that some kitchens kept geese or ducks wandering freely, their droppings mingling with straw, their bodies destined for the spit. You imagine the mess underfoot, the squawking interruptions, and glance down at a chicken darting between legs even now, chased by a boy with flour on his face. The line between livestock and labour was thin here, blurred by smoke and hunger. The smells envelop you: roasted meat, singed fat, onions sizzling, bread crisping, ale simmering in a pot. It is overwhelming, heavy enough to stick in your hair and cloak. Yet your stomach stirs, reminding you that hunger ignores discomfort. You swallow, though the taste of smoke lingers on your tongue. Scholars question how equitable these meals were. Some insist the nobility feasted while servants gnawed scraps. Others point to evidence of generous portions for the household. Everyone fed from the same pots of pottage, though quality differed. Looking around, you see both truths. A spit of venison turns slowly, destined for the dais, while peas and barley bubble in vast pots for the workers. Both meals arise from the same fire, yet their destinies diverge sharply. One odd superstition clings to your thoughts. Some believed that spilling salt in a kitchen invited misfortune unless it was thrown over the left shoulder. You see a boy knock a pinch of it onto the table, his eyes wide. Quickly, he tosses some behind him, earning a laugh from the older cook. The ritual might be small, but in this world of danger and scarcity, every omen mattered. The dogs beneath the tables grow bolder, snapping at scraps and bones. A scullion kicks one gently aside, but it returns moments later, eyes bright, nose twitching. These animals are as much a part of the kitchen as the servants, scavenging, warming the space, sometimes guarding it. Their presence is tolerated, even useful, though their hunger is as endless as the fires. The heat grows oppressive. You wipe your brow, your cloak suddenly too heavy. The torch sputters in the smoky air, its flame dim compared to the glow of the hearths. You feel the sweat bead along your temples, the weight of the air pressing into your lungs. Imagine laboring here not for moments, but for hours, days, years. The kitchens were not just workspaces, they were crucibles, reshaping bodies with heat and labor. The voices rise suddenly as a large cauldron is hauled forward. Its surface ripples with thick stew, the smell strong and sour. Two men carry it carefully, their arms straining, their eyes locked on the sloshing liquid. The cauldron is set near the hearth with a thud, steam rising to envelop the room. The cooks cheer briefly, then return to their tasks without pause. Historians disagree on whether castle kitchens were places of camaraderie or cruelty. Some argue that shared hardship forged bonds between cooks, scullions, and servants. Others point to records of punishments, beatings for mistakes, and endless drudgery. Watching the quick laughter over spilled salt, the sudden scolding of a boy who dropped a knife, you realize both can coexist. Bonds and burdens, laughter and lashings. The smell of bread grows stronger as loaves are pulled from ovens, their crusts golden, steam curling from their cracks. The sight is almost heavenly amid the smoke. You long to tear into one, to feel its warmth in your hands, but you know such bread is counted, rationed, destined for specific mouths. Hunger here is balanced by ledger, not whim. You step back toward the doorway, your cloak heavy with smoke, your eyes stung. The kitchens roar on behind you, unceasing, their labor eternal. To spend a night in a castle is not only to hear the footsteps on battlements or the whispers in chapels. It is to feel the kitchens too, the furnace that feeds the stone, the sweat and smoke that keep nobility alive. You take one last look. The cooks move like shadows in firelight, knives flashing, voices rising. The fires crackle, the pots bubble, the dogs whine. It is messy, relentless, human. Then you turn, stepping back into the cooler corridor, carrying the heat with you like a second cloak. The smoky heat of the kitchens lingers in your cloak as you wander back through the passageways, your torch sputtering with each draught. The castle has shifted fully into morning now. The muffled clatter of buckets, the cries of animals, the rise and fall of voices all weave together into a steady hum. You feel the weight of your sleepless night in your bones, every chamber visited, every draught endured, every sound etched into your mind. And yet the journey is not over until you step outside again. You push open a heavy wooden door and emerge into the bailey. The light is sharper now, though still pale, dawn unfolding in streaks of gold and grey. Frost clings to the ground, glittering faintly on grass and stone. The courtyard is alive with movement. Chickens scuttle underfoot. Horses snort in their stalls. Dogs bark as they chase one another. Servants hurry across the yard with baskets, pails, and tools, their breath puffing like smoke in the chill. Medieval accounts remind us that the bailey was the castle's true workshop, the space where smiths hammered, carpenters sawed, and women spun wool or drew water. Without it, the walls above would have been meaningless. You see it now, every trade crammed into this yard, every motion a thread in the castle's tapestry. One peculiar note from chronicles describes how blacksmiths often worked through the night, their fires never allowed to die. Horses needed shoes, armor needed mending, nails and hinges needed forging. You hear the ring of hammer on anvil even now, rhythmic and metallic, echoing sharp across stone. Sparks fly from a smithy near the wall, each one bright against the grey air. Historians remain divided on how lively these baileys truly were. Some argue they bustled constantly, filled with noise and work from dawn to dusk. Others suggest that on quieter days they resembled farms more than fortresses, with animals grazing lazily. Looking now, you suspect both could be true. Today, urgency fills. The air tables must be prepared, tools readied, animals tended, but perhaps yesterday was calmer, and tomorrow may be again. The smells crowd together: smoke from the forge, dung from the stables, bread from the kitchens, wool damp with dew. Each odour is sharp, distinct, unavoidable. They do not blend so much as jostle, competing for space in your nose. To modern senses it might be overwhelming, but here it is, simply life. A woman bends over a spinning wheel, her foot pumping steadily, the wool stretching between her fingers. The thread catches the faint light, gleaming pale before coiling onto the spindle. A boy nearby chops kindling, his axe head dull but his strokes determined. Two men carry a carcass toward the kitchens, their faces red with exertion, while dogs leap at their heels, snapping for scraps. One curious superstition preserved in folklore suggests that the first voice heard in the bailey each morning determined the household's luck for the day. If it was a servant's cheerful greeting, fortune smiled. If it was a quarrel, misfortune followed. You wonder what omen the castle has earned today, for already you hear laughter mixed with sharp words, blessing and curse intertwined. The air warms as the sun climbs higher, though the frost lingers stubbornly in shadows. You step farther into the yard, your boots crunching on frozen earth. A rooster crows again, triumphant, as though declaring the night's struggles defeated. Around you, the castle's inhabitants push forward, their lives bound to the same rhythm: labour, vigilance, necessity. The walls rise high above, their stones catching the first real glow of sunlight. They seem less forbidding now, less cloaked in shadow, but no less heavy. You think of the guards pacing on the battlements, of the servants scurrying through kitchens, of the soldiers snoring in smoky dormitories. Each one carried the night differently, but all endured it together. The castle is not one story, but many, layered like stone upon stone. Scholars still debate whether castles were more prisons than palaces, more burden than blessing. Some argue they offered safety, wealth, and prestige. Others insist they trapped their inhabitants in cold, damp discomfort. Having lived one night here, you feel the truth pressing from both sides. The walls kept you safe, but they also kept you weary. You walk slowly toward the gatehouse, where the drawbridge rests across the moat. The water below glimmers faintly, thin ice cracking at its edges. The portcullis looms above, iron teeth waiting, yet at this hour it is raised, welcoming carts and villagers bringing goods to trade. Wheels creak, hooves clop, voices call. The castle is not isolated. It breathes with the world beyond its walls. A final curious tidbit lingers in your thoughts. Some visitors described castles as stone hives, buzzing with labour from every corner, ceaseless, tireless, alive. Standing here in the bailey, you understand the metaphor. The Lord may sit at its heart, but every servant, soldier, craftsman, and animal hums with equal necessity. Without them, the hive collapses. You pause just before the gate, turning to look back. The towers rise in the brightening light, their outlines sharp against the morning sky. Smoke curls from chimneys, banners stir faintly in the breeze. It is beautiful, in its own stern way, but you know beauty here is inseparable from burden. A night in a medieval castle is not romance, it is stone and smoke, sweat and frost, laughter and groans. It is survival, carried by countless hands unseen. Your body aches now, your eyes heavy. You think of the straw mattress waiting, of the blanket that scratched, of the curtain that barely held out the cold. You think of the servants bustling even now, their day just beginning, though your night has never truly ended. You feel weariness settle deeper, yet also a strange calm. You have walked through the castle's every layer, touched its warmth and its filth alike. You have seen the night for what it island. The wind softens, the sounds blur. Your steps slow, as though the world itself is easing. You let your breath stretch longer, your body looser, the weight of stone drifting gently away. And so we come to the end of the night. The castle breathes on, its fires crackling, its bells waiting to toll, its people hurrying about their endless tasks. But for you, the journey settles. The walls no longer press. The draughts no longer bite. The smells fade into memory. You are left only with stillness, with the echo of footsteps fading into quiet, with the warmth of the rising sun brushing gently across your face. Rest now. Let the stone dissolve from your shoulders, the smoke drift from your hair. Let the castle shrink into the distance, its weight a story rather than a burden. Sleep comes easier now, softer than straw, warmer than cloaks, steadier than fire. Close your eyes, and let the night fade fully into morning. The castle will keep its watch without you. Sweet dreams.